Tonight we have Mr. Mike Turner as our guest, and we're excited to have him. As always, well, actually the last two we didn't, but we're going to start it back up again. We're going to be sipping on a little something tonight. So this was a gift from one of our former guests, Biagio, who owns Osteria Maria's here in town. He brought this by. He also brought by wine, so we chose to have the wine. So this, you could say this evening's episode and beverage is sponsored by Biagio. So thanks, Biagio. It is Copper Fox. It's a Peachwood American single malt, and they've got a distillery up in Sperryville. I haven't had this before, but it looks pretty good. So we're gonna taste a little bit of that. You could say it's a late celebration of St. Joseph's Day. So, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for being on.
You're welcome.
So, as I mentioned to you before the show started, we typically don't do bios, but we started doing them using ChatGPT because it's fun and it gets the conversation going a little bit. So, what I'm going to do is read this out loud, and then we'll just talk about whether they got it right. So, here we go. Michael Turner is a resident of Front Royal, Virginia, originally from Berkeley, California. He studied biochemistry and physics at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and graduated from Berkeley High School. He currently resides in Front Royal with his wife, Deanna Turner. In April 2018, he voiced his concerns at a Front Royal Town Council meeting regarding the proposition to rezone Valley Health. He argued that without labor and delivery at the new hospital, the safety of women and children could be compromised. He also highlighted Valley Health's dominant position in the local healthcare system and emphasized its moral obligation to provide essential services like labor and delivery. Additionally, his mother, Louise Scott Turner, was a prominent figure in Front Royal, and she co-owned Turner Robert Shaw Funeral Home with her late husband, Calvin Warren Turner. She was actively involved in the community, including organizations such as the Front Royal United Methodist Church and the Front Royal Fire Department Ladies Auxiliary. Is any of that true?
So the beginning part's true, but that's not my mother.
Oh, okay.
The Louise Turner is not me.
Okay.
Right. I'll talk more about my mother, Sandy Turner.
Okay.
Who never was in Front Royal.
Okay,
so,
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so I read that and I was like, that's entirely plausible. That could be, because I don't know who your mom is.
Right.
And maybe she has roots in Front Royal, so we'll go with it. But it's funny. So there must be another Mike Turner locally that is true of, and it doesn't know the difference between you two, which is interesting. But so the first part's true, though?
And for everything before the mom part is true.
Okay. Wasn't it fascinating? Yeah. You're considered I don't know, I guess it wasn't painting you negatively, but the one thing that it says that you did in the community was that you voiced concern at a...
Absolutely.
So there must have been an article or something that referenced you.
Right. Absolutely.
But hey... there are worse things to be referenced about. So
that's for sure.
So yeah, let's start with Berkeley.
Sure. So born in Berkeley, California, to a Jewish mom, and my dad is of German French origin, and so my grandmother, German French and Scottish, is my father. So I'm a quarter Scottish and half Jewish. So I'm kind of a Jewish Scot.
Nice.
Yeah.
The best kind.
It's just what it is, Yeah. But so tremendous legacy from my family in Berkeley, political activism. So I was raised in a family that was very, very active. I was raised a Quaker.
Okay.
Raised among the Friends, and so very, very active in anti-war movement, in civil rights work, in for the United Farm Workers, the grape boycott back in the day. So, for example, when I was a kid, I spent a summer with Cesar Chavez in the Central Valley of California. Yeah. Spent a summer at La Paz and interacting with the union boycott of the grapes in California. So, and then tremendous. My folks ran the Draft Financing Center for the Berkeley Friends meeting. And so our house was a station on the Underground Railroad with draft resistors that wanted out of Vietnam for conscience reasons. And we were a house where they wanted to get out of the country. We would help them get out of the country. So both the active counseling, but also the resistance to the war.
How dangerous was that?
It was dangerous with the government.
Okay.
We knew that our phones were being tapped. We knew that at one point, I remember as a little kid, Mom goes, the FBI's at the front door. You boys get lost. and Dad will deal with this. And so when I was 10, my family moved to an all-black neighborhood in Oakland. And so we got deeply involved with the Black Panther Party for self-defense.
Okay.
And Mom was a community organizer with the Panthers. She's the only one she knew of in the country that had done draft counseling, not just lily white Quaker kids, but black and brown citizens, folks in the Huelga, Cesar Chavez, and folks in the Black Panthers who had a conscious objection to going to fight in Vietnam. And so raised in this very, very active, politically active family. And so starting things and doing things kind of comes naturally for me, right? It was in the Quaker context that I got exposed to the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. And so I was thinking about tonight, and you asked, you could have some talk before on what this is going to be. And I realized that a lot of who I am was resulting from this background. So I wanted to mention a couple of things from Gandhi, because that's probably not something that most of your guests would even know about.
No.
Right. So Gandhi's known for his satyagraha, for his active nonviolence, and his challenge of the British Empire to treat the Indians as humans. And he challenged the Indian people to live up to their dignity as human beings. If they're going to rule their own country, they're going to have inner dignity. And so he had two campaigns that he worked throughout his whole life. There's Satyagraha, which is the active nonviolence. We think of the Salt March, where he organized the remote parts of India. The British put tax on salt, and the Indian people have been going for millennia to go to the ocean and collect salt. But then the British put tax on the salts, and then Gandhi organized this massive salt march from the remote corners of India down to the ocean, and did civil disobedience, resisting the British, imperial rule, right? And so the Satyagrahis are the ones who shed their blood and got beat up in the middle of all this. And the point of that was to change the laws and challenge the civilization of the British. If you're civilized, then treat us like civilized people. It finally resulted, of course, in the British giving India to the Indians. A tremendous thing that happened under Gandhi's influence. But when Gandhi was asked toward the end of his life, would you do more satyagraha, or would you do more community upbuilding, which he called sarbodaya? He said, I would have done way more sarbodaya. So he did case studies. He interviewed people to look and to see what their problems were. And that's the inspirational part for me, is the community upbuilding. So a lot of what I'm about is building up the household of faith, favoring the household of faith and building up the Catholic community so we can be worthy of controlling our destiny and serving Christ. Very inspired by St. Joseph. I was not raised a Christian as a Quaker, which just sounds funny, but true. Raised this activist, kind of this messianic Jewish person, but didn't have a foundation in Jesus. And then I got converted, and that's a whole nother long story, but I got converted to Jesus in the middle of that world. And it was awkward because most of my friends are pagans and New Agers, but I was becoming a Christian. But I didn't know till I became Catholic about Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Okay.
Okay.
No, I had no idea. I was just a Christian kind of solo, me and the scripture, something, right? But when I met my wife, Deanna, and was evangelized by her and her friends, that's when I came to the church, And but the community upbuilding, in high school, they called me Save the Earth Mike at Berkeley High School, okay? Because I was always doing things. I had this messianism, a desire to do things. Now I recognize it as messianism, to serve God. I want to bring the kingdom. But as a kid, that was very immature. And kind of it was political organizing, it was always activism.
What was that motivated by? Just
a yearning for heaven. That's what I recognize now. It's a yearning,
retrospectively?
Yeah, in retrospectively, it's a messianism, it's a yearning for beatitude. It's a yearning for when we get to heaven, we're going to know each other as we are face to face. Can you imagine no more questions? When we get to heaven, there'll be no more questions. And so for me, that's a big deal here. And so this is a hunger for beatitude beyond the hypocrisy, beyond the distancing that we have here. And so this is the motivator underneath me, is to get to heaven. I'm recognizing that as I mature more and more and more, that I'm hungry for heaven, and that's getting purified, thank God. Because as a kid, it wasn't that, it was rough. You know. But always starting things, always doing things. Had this model of a mother who did things. Mom, through the Panthers, through her involvement with the Black Panther Party and our involvement as a family, went to visit David Hilliard in prison every week when he was in prison.
I don't know who that is.
So David Hilliard was third in command of the Panthers. It was Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and David Hilliard. And Huey asked Mom to go visit David in prison when he got railroaded to prison in 1968. And so as a Quaker minister, Mom got chaplain status in the California prison system. So Louise Turner is not me, but Sandy Turner, my mother is, right?
Yeah, she doesn't own a funeral home.
Right, that's right. No ways. But Mom would visit David in prison every week, and our family would go visit David in prison every month. So as a little kid, 5th and 6th grader, I'm in California state prisons. So I interviewed David Hilliard in prison. David was chief of staff of the Panthers. And the Panthers were so popular, still are very popular in the Black community for the good works that they did for the people. The Power to the People movement, the Black Power movement. We can do it ourselves. We don't need the outside people to help us. So when I was a little kid, for example, we went to visit in deepest, blackest Oakland, East Oakland. We went to visit a free shoe factory that the Panthers put together. Okay? Under Panther Guard, this is an area where the police were not allowed in Oakland. But we went under Panther Guard, and I saw with my own eyes a free shoe factory. And they got it together, and they made shoes, and they gave it to people. No money. Here's your shoes.
Can you explain what the Black Panthers are?
Sure.
Because I think that they're an old enough organization that now they're referenced kind of in a negative context.
Correct.
And I think that probably is fair in many cases.
Sure.
But yeah, what was their
mission
and motivation, and then how has that maybe changed now?
Sure. So the Panthers were Black men who had a sense of themselves, and they felt that defending their community from being harangued by the white cops in Oakland. It started in Oakland, where I was from. So they went down defending the boys that were playing basketball, and they'd read the Oakland cops the laws that allowed kids to congregate and stuff like that. But then the Panthers were carrying guns. So here's Black men exercising the Second Amendment rights, but a Black man who's armed is extremely threatening to the power structure of America. This is J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, okay? And the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover destroyed the Black Panther Party for self-defense, okay? We're pacifists. We're pacifists. We're not gun people. But the Panthers are doing a good thing. They're organizing people toward dignity, toward self-respect. They had marriages, right? But then the government, through counter intel, undermined the Panthers with cocaine and with destroying their marriages with infiltrators. There was a close friend of our family, Fred Bennett, who was murdered by counter intel. I knew Fred as a young man, as a very handsome fellow who'd come to the house, and he and Mom would walk around the block and talk. And they knew that they didn't have any bugs on their body, any microphones, when they're walking around the street, walking around the corner. So they walk around the block, and I never knew what they talked about, but they were deeply involved in the inner workings of the Panthers. And At one point, Fred said, and I always admired Fred. He's a handsome guy. He treated us kids with respect. I looked up to him as a male figure. He was a strong dude. He macked in a positive way, okay? And dressed well with the black hat and the black beret and, the whole thing, the leather. And a handsome, a positive man, and a friend of ours, who then said to my mom, he said, Sandy, Huey's asked me to go to Los Angeles. There's infiltrators in the group down in L.A. When I get to the certain house, I'll call you, and you can let so-and-so know that I arrived. Well, he never showed up. And Mom knew that it had been jumped on the way. So she went to the local store and bought a Boston fern and put it in her sunroom. And she called it the Fred Hampton Bennett Memorial Fern. Fred Hampton was another Panther who was murdered. 20 years later, they found the bones of Fred Bennett. And now it's been proved through Freedom of Information Act that they jumped him and got him. So they killed my friend. Okay?
And what was the motivation for that?
Well, the government didn't want black men to have power. J. Edgar Hoover was against black power.
Okay.
And I believe J. Edgar Hoover's FBI is the ones who killed Martin Luther King, too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know for a fact, but I think so.
But, yeah,
I know they killed Fred Bennett. Yeah. That's been proved, right?
Okay.
So the Panthers were a movement of black power, but they had support from people like us. So the Panthers were blacklisted in Oakland. They couldn't buy housing. So the Turner family bought housing for them with their money and then gave them the houses. So we helped them buy housing for their schools. They had their own schools, okay, and the community centers. And so we supported them to do the right thing within the community. So I've got a positive view of the original Black Panther Party for self-defense, and I knew some of them.
Yeah.
As a
So
kid.
how has that changed now? Because I think that a lot of, now maybe some of the principles are still there. Maybe it's grown to the point that it's been corrupted. I don't know all of the ins and outs, but like I would think that it's a different institution nowadays.
Oh, of course. And it's not the same Panthers anymore, for sure. The original Panthers are wiped out. Again, the government brought in cocaine. I don't know if you realize that the government, through the Vietnam War, brought the hard drugs into the black ghettos to destroy the ghettos. So heroin was imported from Southeast Asia through the government influence to destroy the black power and brown power movements. That's a fact. Okay. So that there was real move from the government, from the control of the national government, to destroy these radical movements. Okay. Our family was supportive, and I'm still supportive of people determining their own rights and not having the distant government tell them what to do.
Sure.
In that sense, I'm very Scottish. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. That's where the kilt comes in.
Yeah, it really does. So on the Scottish side, I'm descended from Clan Gordon, which is a militant Catholic clan.
Okay.
This is my father's side. And, so flipping over to the Scottish thing for a second.
Yeah.
This is complex.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is long format for a
Okay,
reason.
right
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Good. So so on the Scottish side, my clan predecessor, Adam the Gordon, took the first delegation to the Pope called the Declaration of Arbroath in 1285-ish, something like maybe 1300, and took a delegation of the Pope representing 56 barons and abbots and bishops in Scotland, pleading with the Pope for the right to be recognized as a separate nation. So Adam the Gordon led this delegation, Declaration of Arbroath, and this is the first time the Pope recognized Scotland. They succeeded. So Adam the Gordon was given the lands at Strathshire in Scotland. I'm not pronouncing that right. Commonly known as Huntly, Scotland.
Okay.
Okay. And so Declaration of Arbroath is the predecessor document to our Declaration of Independence. It's a very similar structure, that the people have the right to determine their own destiny, which is the Panther thing. We have the right to determine our destiny. No one tells us what to do. We have the right. So I'm very, very suspicious still of distant government telling us what to do.
Yeah.
And that brings me to my involvement locally in Front Royal, that if we get it together as Catholics, we don't have to be in obedience to the distant government of D.C. We can get together and organize within ourselves the positive things. This is back to the community development issues. So let me jump. I know this sounds so scattered, but let me jump to a story about my mom and the kind of thing that inspires me still. So Mom was very active with the Quakers, with the American Friends Service Committee. And in the mid-50s, before I was born in 58, they started a group called Intertribal Friendship House in Oakland. Okay? This is before the Panthers work. This is community development work in Oakland, California. And recognizing that the Native Americans were tremendously, I'll say, oppressed with the cultural contract with the whites. So high suicide rates, high alcoholism, kind of devastated as a peoples. Tremendous kind of self-hate from the cultural contract with white America. So what they did was they got together and hired the brightest lights they could find in the Native American kids. They pull in the brightest lights. This is Quakers' kind of community service, community development. And then they started this Intertribal Friendship House. And so for decades, they worked with them and taught them the workings of the business. When I was a kid, we'd go down there at Christmas time and buy our Christmas gifts at Intertribal. This is all the necklaces and the bracelets of all the different tribes. And, it was a thing. And Mom helped start this thing. And so decades later, after training the Native peoples in how to get along with each other, with business processes, the Quakers devolved the corporation and gave the business to the Native peoples. What's amazing about that is an Intertribal Friendship House is still going. Started in the mid-50s by my mom and some others. And it's still going. It's still going as a community advocacy place where people can relate and get to know each other. I love that stuff. I know the people who started another one called Self-Help Housing, which is the predecessor to Habitat for Humanity. I know the people that started that. So the consciousness that if a person's willing to work hard, they end up owning a house. I love that.
Yeah.
And here we are today. Can you afford where you rent?
No.
Okay, it's too much.
Yeah.
And the rentals many times cost more than the mortgages. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And a family needs to own their own place to really get invested. And the pressures now with the cost of housing is oppressive to our Catholic family life. It puts pressure that both the mom and the dad have to work, which is ridiculous. Moms need to be home with the kids, is where I'm at. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So before we get, I guess, a little further, you said that you were raised as a Quaker, but primarily the religion, so to speak, of the family is political activism.
I would say that's correct.
So you were not really a devout Quaker, or what? Like,
Well,
what did that look like? Because there is a difference between a traditional Quaker and saying, "Yeah, I'm a Quaker," but
right. So the Friends, the Quakers, there's 5 different branches. And so I was part of the Hicksite split.
Okay.
Pacific Yearly Meeting on the West Coast is the political activism. And so there's a spirituality, but the spirituality is whatever you feel deeply inside of yourself is true.
Okay.
Right? So leading the world into whatever I feel deeply, which is ridiculous in objective truth, but that's where I was raised. And so the self, what we used to call navel gazing, searching yourself, looking carefully at yourself and searching. And I look back and it's weird, but I still, of course, know people in that world, but that's not at all where I'm at. And so coming to the Catholic Church has been an experience of objective truth. This is not about me. I didn't create the religion. I've come to the faith. I love going to daily mass. Okay, I love going, and it's one of my favorite things in the world to go at the end of a daily mass. And I go because the truth is there, but it's not about me. So it's objectively revealed. The church is given to us. The faith is given as a gift, and then we can receive the gift versus I have to do it myself.
Right.
But I was raised to think I had to do it myself.
So would you have considered yourself religious, or was it just kind of a facade?
I was spiritual. I was a spiritual person.
Okay.
But looking for more, but hungry. Yeah, it's definitely in the pagan world, the New Age world. It wasn't. We ridiculed Christians when I was a kid. Again, in this black neighborhood was a middle class black neighborhood. So right down the street was King Narcissus, and King Narcissus had 5 houses in our middle class street in a black neighborhood. King Narcissus was a radio preacher. But we would ridicule King Narcissus when he came out on Sunday mornings on his red carpet. We'd go by there and we'd see the red carpet.
Yeah, fair
and
enough.
over his door it said, Jesus gave this royal palace. And me and my brothers and my parents would kind of laugh at this black radio preacher, right? But now I'm a Christian. Jesus did give his royal palace, and God bless King Narcissus. But so it's kind of, So when I crossed the Tiber to Christian faith, that freaked my parents out. Okay?
I bet.
It did.
Did that cause a rift?
And not a little rift, a huge rift.
Big
and
rift.
that's into some very painful stuff.
Sure.
And so, but I've learned the way of our faith is learning how to forgive. In my family, I didn't learn how to forgive. If you mess with me when I was a kid, I'd get you back.
Yeah.
But I've learned the way of forgiveness. And I want to be like Jesus, who from the cross, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So I'm learning. I'm almost 67. I'm still learning forgiveness.
Yeah.
But I choose the way of Jesus.
So what was the path that, or maybe the incident that started the path towards Christianity or towards Catholicism?
I'll give you an example of it's layers and layers of conversion, right? I was deeply involved in the anti-nuclear movement when I was a kid, through college. I went to UC Santa Cruz, and I was doing biochemistry. My grandfather, my mother's father, was a physician, so I was pre-med, worked very, very hard at the science, but also very concerned about the nuclear arms race.
Okay.
And so I was doing protesting at Lawrence Livermore Labs, literally went to jail to protest And the civil disobedience thing was what we just all did that. That was what we did when I was a kid. So I went to jail protesting the UC Regent's role in controlling all the nuclear weapons, and that it should be, protesting that. And so in the middle of that, Mom suggested that I contact Louis Vitale, who's the provincial for the Franciscans on the West Coast at that point.
Okay.
And they'd worked civil rights stuff much earlier. Okay. And so I contacted Father Louis Vitale, and I said, I'm organizing this prayer vigil at Lawrence Livermore Labs on the 800th feast day of St. Francis. Would the Franciscans like to come and join me in this protest prayer meeting? And he said, sure. So there's a couple of us hippies from Santa Cruz that came up. I didn't have long hair, but still that's basically where I was. Yeah. And here's a whole bunch of maybe 20 brown robe friars. And we did this 6 in the morning at the gates of Lawrence Livermore. We did this prayer meeting. It was wonderful. And I felt so successful. I'd organized the Catholics, right? But then the obligation went both ways. So then they invited me to religious retreats for peacemakers. This is 1982. And the U.S. bishops had just come out with a challenge for peace, which is the Catholic bishop's position on nuclear weapons and the formation of things. So I felt obliged to go, and I wanted to go to this religious retreat for peacemakers. So I went to this retreat at the Holy Redeemer Center in Oakland, one of my first times in a Catholic church, right? And sat toward the back. And this Bishop Thomas Gumbleton, was leading this retreat, and he was one of the authors of Challenge of Peace. What's so embarrassing today is that Bishop Gumbleton is way far on the left wing of the church, supporting homosexuality. I don't know if he's still living, but very much in a place that I'm not at today. Yeah. But it took a bishop that far out to reach me. So I had a personal experience of Jesus that night as Bishop Gumbleton preached. He's going through salvation history. Wow. And he's going through the history of how the Messiah came and how shalom. They did research with Jewish scholars. Shalom means not just hello, goodbye, peace, but also that the promise of God's kingdom is coming. There's this messianic hope for the kingdom, which is now, of course, the hope of my life. And so shalom. So he's teaching all this and going through. And then he made a personal invitation to follow Jesus. And that night I chose to follow Jesus.
Just because of that?
Well, hearing this, I had no idea who this bishop is. Wow. But by my experience of him, he's lit up like a Christmas tree. I felt like he's just talking to me. Yeah. And I went out of there having decided to be a Christian. Wow. But I told my mom, and that freaked her out.
Who were you talking to?
No, it's, don't bring that crazy stuff. Don't talk forgiveness around here. Don't bring that stuff around here. Because Mom was hardened with the political stuff. Yeah. May she rest in peace. But she lived a very Christian life. She didn't call it Christian. But her favorite writers were Dorothy Day and Mother Teresa. On her bedside, she had these wonderful Catholic authors. And when I was a little kid, Mom took me to the San Ysidro store, a Catholic bookstore, and bought me a Bible when I'm like a 14-year-old. And she encouraged me to go hang out with the Catholic workers in Los Angeles. So I'd been down to the Catholic worker movement in Skid Row in Los Angeles as a much younger man. But the real conversion time one of the times was this decision with Bishop Gumbleton. But then you have to work these things out.
Wow. It's so fascinating to me because I'm sure this is not a unique experience of someone who is so far on the outskirts of Christianity, and then they come across someone who would be considered within Christianity or Catholicism to be woke or to be leftist or to be liberal or something. And while that criticism of that particular person is true, and that's their soul, right? If they're preaching that certain things are okay within the church's teaching and they're not, that's obviously a problem. Yeah. At the same time, it's so fascinating to see that God can still use that blunted instrument to still, spark someone. And then
absolutely.
So it's just incredible to see that, and I'm sure that's not a unique experience. But if he had come out saying really traditional things, bashing on whatever political group you were a part of at the time, that would have been your taste of Catholicism, and you would have that may have totally changed the course of your life because you wouldn't have pursued it more.
Who knows?
But having that individual encounter, even though it sounds like he was possibly a fairly flawed bishop.
Yeah, indeed. But
it still leads you to Christ.
It did. So I made this decision with Gumbleton. And then the same group of friars invited me to an all-night prayer vigil at St. Mary's Cathedral in San Francisco. And so we did this all night. This is all associated with the 800th feast day of St. Francis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so I went down to this all-night prayer vigil. And so the Franciscans are coming out of all the cloisters for this. It's that big of a deal. So this all night of song and adoration, song. And so I was there all night. It was an incredible experience of music and contact and prayer. And really, I really got pulled in. And then in the morning, we're walking down to the soup kitchen, the St. Mary's soup kitchen. And there's this little nun that I'm kind of walking with. And I was trying to kind of talk to her about nuclear weapons, because that was my big thing, and how evil nuclear weapons were. And she said to me, well, what about the babies? What about abortion? And I didn't have any answers, because I was on the other side of that whole issue. Okay? And I had no answers, but she stunned me. This little teeny nun, don't know who she was, but it disturbed me and really affected me. And then we did our breakfast thing, but had this contact with this Catholic nun who challenged me, not on these big political issues, but on the personal issues. Are we killing babies? And yes, we're killing babies.
Yeah. So at that time, were you pro-abortion, or were you just anti-people who were pro-life?
Sadly, I was pro-abortion.
Okay.
Without any knowledge, but that's
right.
The political group that I was part of, that's where we were. So when I became a Catholic and really chose to follow Christ, I left behind my own people. I still fight with them. I still see some friends, and we still tangle in these things.
Yeah.
The issues of promiscuity, the issues of, the issues of commitment, and the issues of abortion.
And is that springing forth from a ultimate personal freedom that has some good connotations of, yes, the government shouldn't be able to tell me what to wear or whether I can have a gun in this place or that place, but then it continues further into, they also can't tell me how to live my life, and they can't tell me what to do with my children.
Exactly.
Is that what it is? It's a continuation of that,
there's rebellion
freedom.
There's rebellion, but you're killing babies, man. So you can't kill babies. These are real human beings.
Yeah.
But that little nun confronted me first on that.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was in such a bubble, as it were. I was in my own world, right?
Yep.
So it took a while to work that all out. So then I'm in Santa Cruz, and I'm organizing. The Quakers are active with the sanctuary movement with Archbishop Romero.
Okay.
So Archbishop Romero was murdered in the cathedral by American-funded troops. The juntas came in and they killed Archbishop Romero. The real pious Catholics in El Salvador had to flee for their lives. And so the Quakers were involved in the sanctuario movement that I was deeply involved in. We were bringing them illegally into the country. This challenges the whole immigration stuff we're in the middle of. And by the way, today, I'm for the border being closed. I'm for kicking out the people. I'm not against what we're in the middle of, very much for it. But at that point, we were actually physically bringing in Salvadorians who were fleeing for their lives, for sanctuary. And I had a couple Salvadorian girls living up in our attic at that point. And we're deeply involved in getting them jobs, and illegally. There are no papers.
Right.
Like the Underground Railroad of the Quakers historically. So we're doing the same thing with the Salvadorians. But I felt I didn't know them very well. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but I didn't know them well enough. So I organized a liberation theology Bible study.
There you go.
Okay. Not knowing, right? Just clueless.
Right.
Okay. But, because, today, I'm not at all into liberation theology, but that was I thought that's where they were. So we hired somebody to come and do translation for us. And I called up the local Catholic church, because they're Catholics. And I said to Sister Bridget at Our Lady Star of the Sea in Santa Cruz, we're doing this Bible study. Can we use a class? And sure, got my name. And then it was announced in the church bulletin, Bible study. So here we are in this Bible study.
Okay.
Right? In the classroom. And again, I was successful. I was organizing Catholics, right? But God has a sense of humor with my hubris. Okay? So I'm in this situation, and in comes, we're in the middle of this whole, doing some music, doing some singing, but also studying the Bible, and then translations, so communicating for one of the first times with the Salvadorians. And in comes Deanna, now my wife, wheeling Marie Tucker, a little old lady that she went to retreats with. She came tooting into the to her church. That's how I met Deanna. Okay. She comes in, she looks like she's about 16. She's got a guitar strung across her back, and she's wielding this elderly lady that she's working with. And all she saw in the bulletin was Bible study at her church, so she shows up. Right? And we did some singing together, and things didn't get started that time, but the next time we got set up, and that's how our marriage got started, was friends of ours later, a couple of years later, introduced us again, but next time it was a setup.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's. But I first met her.
Did you have contact with her in those couple of years?
Okay. I didn't.
But you remembered.
Once you can't forget these things.
Yeah, right.
You can't forget these things. But so God has a sense of humor. I intend certain things, but then God brings it about how He wants it. Mm-hmm. Right. So I intended to kind of organize Catholics, but how I got organized, and then when we started dating, one of her best friends, Deanna was discerning religious vocation. And so one of her best friends, who later became a priest, Father Peter Kuroda. So as soon as we fell in love with each other, started dating from this setup. I was invited to a prayer meeting, and the prayer meeting was the other couple and Deanna and I. So boom, so we got set up. So we're in love with each other. We're starting to date. And Peter shows up at my house. Peter knew me because I was politically active. He was politically active. We're in different camps. But Peter Kuroda knew me. And so he shows up at my house and he goes, Mike, Deanna's a virgin. She intends to be a virgin until marriage. If you're going to start dating her, you need to respect her. This is like a day after we started dating. And I'm red in the face, right? Because she had gone to him. Yeah. And, and he says, you need to intend marriage with her if you're going to date her. And Mike, you need to be Catholic.
Wow.
Boom.
Yeah.
And so I basically said, okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir is right. And very authoritative, But then her best friends in this religious discernment group surrounded me. So I went to this retreat. Peter and those guys went off to this retreat at some deacon's house far away. So we drove down there. We're sleeping on the floor in sleeping bags. And Timothy Steiner comes up. He goes, Mike, where are you crashing out? I said, I don't know. He said, how about here? So you mind if I sleep next? I said, sure. So rolled out sleeping bags. And as he says, have you ever heard of Catholic moral theology? Right? Which I had never heard of.
Yeah.
Right? And so till like 2 a.m, he downloads Catholic moral theology. And, just shared with me. So her best friends surrounded me. Yeah. And the bachelor party was at the soup kitchen that Peter had started. Peter was a very, long story with Peter Kuroda, but he's worth looking into at some point. But later became a priest, now deceased, may he rest in peace. But he's the best man at our wedding.
Oh, okay. Very
important part of our family, Peter Kuroda. So.
Where was he a priest?
He's a priest in Stockton.
Okay.
But Peter was raised in the Diocese of Monterey, where we're from. Mm-hmm. But the diocese didn't accept him because he's too radical, because he'd had a radical conversion experience. He was a rich real estate guy who had this conversion experience to St. Francis and had sold everything.
Sounds a little bit like St. Francis, yeah.
He did, literally, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he sold his houses in Aptos, he sold his Mercedes, and he took a voluntary vow of poverty. He's only accepting clothes that were donated, walking barefoot. And he sold everything and bought this building and started a soup kitchen, St. Francis Catholic Kitchen. That's still going. But in this radical movement of following John Paul II, following Mother Teresa, Padre Pio, Gregorian chant, liturgy of the hours, this orthodoxy, and exposed me first to all those things, right? And Deanna's promoting. She said, "I really want to have a Catholic family." Talk to me all about John Paul II. He's still Pope, and so came into the church under JP2. He was an incredible inspiration to me. So glad I came in under John Paul II. And what a man!
Yeah,
I'm inspired by men. I'm inspired by. So when I first was becoming a Christian, I wanted to be like Jesus, but I didn't want to be like them. Those others.
Yeah.
The people who call themselves Christians. Okay? So from the family history going back on the Jewish side, my people were chased out of Russia by people who called themselves Christians. Okay, the pogroms.
Yeah.
So you've seen Fiddler on the Roof? Okay, that's very much my family story. We come from a little shtetl outside of Kiev, like Anatevka. And so that intensity, of course I'm talking very intensely, it's just that's kind of who I am, right? But the intensity of the Jews being stuck in the Pale of Russia for like 600 years, not being allowed to own land, and under the rabbinical law. And when the rabbinical law broke apart, and the pogroms came from the people who called themselves Christians, the Cossacks, came and burned the villages, and people dispersed, that messianic intensity, which I carry, is what led the Jews to America, of course, but led the Jews to be the top of all the classes of doctors, lawyers, of course, rabbis. In physics, I've got a cousin who's an advanced, genius PhD physicist, right? And so the Jews were at the top of all the world in that context. My mother, tremendous pressure on my mom, for example, to marry a doctor, a lawyer, a rabbi, but she broke out of upper middle class Chicago to go west and work with the blacks, work on the interracial stuff. So, anyway.
And was that just an inspiration? Like what
She
caused
had
her
a
to...
she had a black boyfriend in college, which freaked her upper middle class parents out. So sadly, in the family of the Simpkin family, my mother's dad was Simpkin. Of the 7 Simpkin brothers and sisters, 4 of them came to the country, came to the U.S. 3 got left behind in Russia in the middle of all these pogroms and leaving, early 1900s. Of the 7 siblings, they only had 3 kids that came out of the 7. That's the sadness of the generational.
Yeah.
So there was 3 single children, my mom, cousin David, cousin Anita, of the 7 children. Can you imagine? You've got a large family. Imagine if there's only 3 that come from your siblings.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So the shutting down of the hope in the future is such a tragedy. You know?
So at what point did you officially cross the Tiber? It sounds like when you started dating, that was the big kind of awakening of, this is something I need to take seriously and consider.
Well, Peter challenged me to become Catholic, so then I went into RCIA. I love Deanna. I saw in Deanna, different than I'd ever seen in any other woman, I wanted her to be the mother of my children. And she's talking about purity and living chastely till marriage. And I was inspired by that, and we did, thank God.
Yeah.
A year and a half, close to 2 years later, we were wed. And she was a virgin, thank God. But it was a challenge to me. It's different from how I was raised and different from what my practice was.
Yeah.
But thank God.
Yeah.
And so then I was baptized after all the sins of my youth. I was baptized. I was the only one that year at the Easter Vigil. The baptism I felt kind of numb by, but the confirmation, the anointing of the Holy Spirit on my forehead with the chrism, that woke me up. I mean, I was there. I really remember that.
Wow.
It was Easter Vigil 1988. Of course, then I had tangles with the RCA class in the church, which is teaching garbage, teaching all kinds of New Age garbage.
Right.
But I'd been evangelized by Peter, later Father Peter Kuroda, and by Deanna, by their prayer meetings, by the Marian movements. I love the Marian pilgrimages, the Marian, the Marian processions.
Yeah.
The Rosary procession we have here, I brought this from California. Others here helped, but it was my idea to start a Rosary procession.
This is the Fatima procession?
Yeah, in October, the Parish procession.
Yeah.
Right. Because we did all this Marian stuff out west. Where's the Marian processions? Yeah.
So were there any particular objections to Catholicism? Because I was actually just talking to a guy the other day, not Catholic. Him and his wife are both fallen away. And they were pressing me on some things, and I was pressing them on some things. And I said, look, ultimately, in my experience, it comes down to 3 things. You either have a problem with the papacy, you have a problem with Mary, or you have a problem with the Eucharist.
Right.
That's not always true. Could be a different thing. But typically, if your objection is praying to the saints, okay, well, then you're also objecting to praying to Mary. Or if you have a problem with the interpretation of Scripture, okay, well, really the big pivotal moment in Scripture is the Eucharist, and you have to be on board for that. It doesn't need to be any of those 3, but were those challenges for you, or did you just kind of go into receptance mode and I'm not fighting this anymore, I'm not objecting, I'm in and I'm just here to learn?
Well, there was resistance. There was inspiration from the Holy Spirit, drawn to the Eucharist, drawn to Our Lady as a perfect mother, because my mother was flawed, So drawn to our perfect mother, of course, drawn to St. Joseph. But there was political challenges because of my political background.
Okay.
So right at that point, Junipero Sierra was being canonized. And those big objections from all my previous people, against this Indian hater. So I really had to wrestle with what was Junipero Serra about? Was he really a saint or was he oppressing Indians? And so I studied, I dug into it. And I decided he was a saint and this was cool, this was good. So it's right about that time with those Junipero Serras of my own questioning and kind of looking at the faith. Am I really doing this for Deanna or am I doing this for myself? That she pulled away from our relationship. She said, Michael, I love you, but I'm not sure this is right for me, so I'm going to pull away for a while. But I kept showing up at the prayer meetings. I kept showing up at the masses, at the Oblates of St. Joseph, I kept showing up. And this little Italian lady who loved us as a couple, Rena Grispo, Rena came up and says, Mike, everything okay? You and Deanna sitting separately. Everything okay? I said, well, no, Rena, she's decided to pull away. She said, oh, Mike, come with me. So she marched me over to the bookstore. She's in her 90s, right? She's vigorous. She says, Mike, buy this novena book to Padre Pio. Pray this whole novena. It's going to be okay. So I prayed a 54-day novena to Padre Pio.
Oh, wow.
No, because I seen in Deanna the woman that I wanted to be the mother of my children. Okay, so I hit the deck. And so I prayed 27 days petition, 27-day Thanksgiving. I never told her. I just prayed. I was praying the rosary at that point. I just prayed. I kept coming to masses whenever I could. I'm still working.
And you hadn't been baptized or anything at this point?
But I'm still on RCIA.
Okay.
Yeah. But so I prayed this novena, and guess who came back right after the novena finished? Right? But it's interesting because I had given, during the first 27-day petition, I was like lonely and really wanted her. In 27 days of Thanksgiving, I kind of abandoned it having to be her. And I decided for myself that I wanted to be Catholic, separate than Deanna. So I had to go through a maturation process. It was my decision. But then coming back, of course, great rejoicing and now we're 36 years wed. Yeah. So great success
congrats.
for me. Incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible success. 6 children, 3 in heaven. Tremendous success I made the best decision I ever made. Right? It was to come to the faith and come to the sacrament of marriage, to actually have a marriage versus just a relationship, to not just be spiritual, but to be religious, to be frum, which is the Yiddish for orthodox. I'm a frum. My soul is frum. My soul is orthodox. I want the truth. I want it vigorously. I don't want don't mess with me. Don't partially teach me things. Give it to me straight. Don't mess with my soul. Don't fool around and pretend about things. I want it real. I want the real thing.
Yeah.
I'm hungry for that because I'm hungry for heaven.
Yeah.
Give it to me straight, man.
Yeah, and I think that Catholicism, that it's not always the way that people are attracted in, but I think that a lot of times from what I've seen, guys tend to be very attracted by, this is real. You have a cross. This isn't, Jesus died for your sins and now you can do whatever you want. He's inviting you to carry the cross. This is going to be hard.
Amen.
And if it's easy, you're doing something wrong. And obviously that could push people away, but I think a lot of guys really latch onto that and they're like, oh, okay, because now I can channel this cross into something fruitful.
Amen.
And then you find purpose in suffering.
Amen.
And outside of the faith, it's just
what is it?
It's just nothing. It's vapid.
Yeah, I'm totally inspired by the manly priests. I'm totally inspired by Father Colby, by John Paul II.
Yeah.
What a man. So I want to be like Jesus, but not like them. I want to be like John Paul II as a father figure and as just a manly character. So during the Shoah, during the Holocaust, the Nazis had taken over the Polish seminary, where John Paul II was in secret seminary, and they used the chapel as their bathroom. Okay, so after the war, the Archbishop of Krakow was going to cast lots for who's going to clean up the chapel, and JP2, Karol Wojtyła, stood up and said, "You don't need to cast lots. I'll take care of this." And he did it by himself. He cleaned up the chapel that was a latrine. Now that's the kind of man I want to be. Hard, but just, you don't need to ask me. You don't need to throw lots. You don't need to assign me. I'll just volunteer to serve God. Love it. What a man.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
What an inspiration. So again and again, the courage and the way he died, the courage of so again, with learning forgiveness. From my background, big time still so important for me. John Paul II, I forgive everybody who's ever hurt me. And I beg you that you forgive me for anything I've ever done to you. Mm. So entering into the Paschal mystery of forgiveness and accepting forgiveness, I want to die like that. Mm. I want to die forgiving, begging forgiveness. Please forgive me if I ever hurt you. Mm. I forgive you for anything you've ever done. It's incredible.
Do you find that that's easier to do with your kind of pacifist background, like that it's more ingrained in you we shouldn't be fighting, we want to be at peace? Because I think that that's something that I've always struggled with, and I would assume a lot of Catholics, probably just depends on the background, but if they read that the passage in Scripture, like I've come to bring peace, and blessed are the peacemakers, and you're like, but there's injustice in the world, and we need to fight that, and people have offended me, and yes, turn the other cheek, but at the same time, justice. And it seems like, I think particularly in the conservative movement, there can be a tendency to overemphasize justice. And obviously, we need justice. People need to go to jail. People need to be punished for their crimes.
Absolutely.
But there can be an overemphasis of that to the point where there isn't forgiveness. And it's, I have a grudge against this person, and so we're taking them to litigation, or we're doing whatever. And again, it's all very scenario specific, but I would expect that a lot of people struggle with what that means. Like, what does that mean to be peacemakers? When do we need to stand up and say something, and when do we just need to walk away and forgive?
That's a great question, and I that's a journey that I'm still on. But I know that for me, whatever I do politically, whatever I do, I have to be forgiving. I have to, in my heart, I can't hold a bitterness, and there's been tremendous suffering. We've experienced some real tragedies in our family that are very difficult to forgive. The things that have happened to us personally as a family. But I choose to forgive anyway. I want to be like Jesus.
Yeah.
I want to go to heaven. I yearn for the day, when I hear the voice of our Savior saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Mm-hmm. Now, the time's not here. A couple of years ago, I had the heart problems. Remember that whole thing?
Yeah.
I almost died. And I should have been dead except for modern technology. I should be dead today, which means now I'm in overtime.
Yeah. Right.
So now I have new obligations. I need to remember why I'm still alive. Okay. So now I have special duties. I'm in overtime.
Yeah.
Right. There's a few of us in the parish who should be dead. This is a great fellowship with us.
Yeah.
We're the overtimers.
Yeah.
I'm in overtime, which means I need to be even more zealous for forgiveness, because I want the answer. I don't want to end up at the end of my life with any regrets. And we're going to talk about the gold mining project. Well, that's one of the things I'm doing because I don't want to regret not having done something.
Yeah.
Right? For God. But I don't want to have any regrets. We're all going to have regrets, right?
Yeah.
But I realize that I'm the kind of person, I've got so many things going. I've got so many things I want to do that when I die, they're not going to be done. So I also need to be at peace with all the things that I want to do. They're not going to finish. And that's okay, because they're not my projects. The really good projects that I do are from God, for God, and beyond me. Right? So It's not about me. It's not about, if I can do anything to bring light to the world and be forgiving, that's where I want to be. Mm-hmm. I'm just still learning. Sure.
Something you mentioned earlier was kind of that the different philosophical view of being involved locally and being involved nationally, or kind of politically, in this big abstract sense.
Sure.
And I think that's something that men specifically really struggle with, because men, there's that call to be great and to go change the world and to be involved in national politics. And of course, some people are called to that. You are called to that. But I think that the vast majority of people are actually called to move to a small town, raise a family, work the best job that you can find, do something that you love, treat people well, etc.
Right.
And I think that actually is almost more of a struggle, because if you had this great call to adventure, it's like, okay, men in particular can really buckle up and do that. Like, that's why men are soldiers. We're mission oriented. We've got the team. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the objective. Let's go. And so the actual struggle, which I think this is so fascinating, just kind of philosophically or even theologically, is that the model that we were given is St. Joseph. And St. Joseph did have his times of fleeing to Egypt and doing these kind of big radical things. But at the same time, 90% or more of his life is just, you're just a poor carpenter and you're raising the Son of God in that's all you're doing. You're not leading some rebel cause.
That's right.
You're not fighting a crusade.
That's right.
You're here making a table for the person down the street.
Right. Doing the positive
and
upbuilding of the community.
Yeah.
Doing the positive, the regular old things that. So one of the things we have a crisis of today is a crisis of futurelessness.
Of futurelessness?
Futurelessness. So I was plagued by this as a young Quaker kid, believing that there was going to be no future. Okay, and I went through paralysis around this spiritually, politically, that the doors of our civilization are closing. There's no way out of our own evilness as humans. And I was wrong about that. I had to come to Jesus to go, it's not about, and so I'm very much about building civilization today. I want to look way beyond my own life. And one of the gifts of manhood is we look far ahead of ourselves. We plan. It's not that women don't have the gift of planning, but men have a specific gift of planning. And we can, in some sense, better than women, it's a gift of manhood to kind of put our emotions to the corner and plan without all the feelings of it. And we need to feel. We're feeling people. But there's also this gift of looking ahead and planning. That's a very male-specific gift. And so if we don't think about the long-term civilization effect and building the culture of love, civilization of love, against the culture of death, if we don't plan like John Paul II challenged us, there won't be a future because we haven't planned.
Right.
So are we thinking about things in our everyday life that lead to things that are positive way beyond our lives? So I'm very much captured by those ideas today of doing things that are way beyond me. I'm very much, for example, a proponent of distributism.
Okay.
I love the concepts of building a civilization based on the guilds and based on real training and based on workers' co-ops. Those are also derivatives from my Quaker background. But I love the concepts of actually doing things together for God.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that distributism, if you're talking about the large social term, it really is a lot of it's communism.
No. Very distinct.
Well, how are they distinct?
Very good. So communism would be, so the church teaches through the social teaching of the church, starting with Rerum Novarum, all the way up through the current, same Pope Benedict, for example, JP2. The church repudiates communism. So communism is not the economic model. Socialism is not the model.
Right.
Unbridled capitalism is not the model, but distributism is. So distributism, like, for example, the Mondragon cooperatives in the Basque region of Spain. So distributism is what the church teaches as a positive economic model for worker-employee associations. Not a boss-employee-servant kind of relationship, but let's do this together.
Yeah.
So where the people who work in a company actually own the company. It's not communism, because it's not controlled by the government.
Right.
That's the distinction.
Okay. So I guess,
socialism.
So if you're thinking about distributism in a communist sense, that's communists saying, distributism because everyone gets an equal piece of the pie and all of that, but that's government control.
Correct. Right.
So the difference is it's like each corporation or each business, people have ownership, and so there's not the slave master.
That's right.
Difference.
That's right. So you actually own the business that you're working in. It's actually your business, and a man can give himself completely to it as the concept.
Yeah.
So it's the positive teaching of the church. This is the church promotes distributism in the social teachings of the church. Orthodoxy, again, not in the modern, Pope Francis type stuff. Okay, but in
speaking of liberation theology, right?
God help us.
Sometimes.
Oh, God help us.
Yeah.
And that's a whole sad story that we're in the middle of right now.
But
historically, the Orthodox teaching of the church for the social teachings are very, very positive, very, very good, in my view.
Okay.
And so distributism, where men own their own company, and they control the destiny. So there's not a fat cat at the top.
Yeah.
And a bunch of little guys underneath. But there's difference of wages, of course.
Sure.
But we're in this together. So I'm bound, morally, I believe, to not make more than the lowest person in whatever company I'm building. So I don't have the rights to make infinite capital and have somebody working as my janitor who makes $12 an hour. It's got to be pulled together. So let me ask this question. This kind of goes to Catholic economics, which is a big thought I've had, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot about these things. What is the limit for the amount of money that any one person should have? Okay? So the church teaches that there is a limit, that beyond what you actually need, and that can be quite generous for generational wealth, etc. But beyond what you really need doesn't belong to you.
I wouldn't say that I disagree with that, but what is the reason that the church gives for that?
Well, that the money beyond what we really need belongs to God, and it belongs to the poor. And we're stewards of the money. Yeah. If I make a bunch of money, I'm stewards of it, but it's not mine. It's actually God's possession that belongs to the poor. Yeah. So then I'm required by Almighty God, if I'm wealthy, to then be magnanimous, to be lavishing on the poor.
I think it's difficult. And I've talked about this with a couple of my friends, just kind of talking about like how far do you pursue something for the sake of money? Because if you have college debt and you have payments and you have, whatever, everyone has things they need to pay. But if you have that to an exorbitant rate and you have the capacity to go to, an oil site in Texas or go to Alaska and go deep fishing, like, why would you not do that? Like, you pay off your debts faster. Yeah, this isn't something you want to do the rest of your life. Maybe you don't like it.
Sure.
But maybe there actually is kind of a justice and a prudence in going and making $100,000 in a year, paying everything you owe, having some savings, and then switch to a more, standard daily job that is more, beneficial to having a family, etc.
Sure. Because you're closer to home.
Yeah, you're closer to home, or you can start your own online business, or whatever that might be.
Sure.
But it is interesting because obviously there's people like Elon Musk, and there's these huge billionaires in the world that everyone's aware of. But I think just locally, I know quite a few people that I would consider to be wealthy, or at least maybe if they're not in the top 1%, they're in the top 10%, fairly well off.
Sure.
But all of those people, like with no exceptions, are at every charity thing that I see. I know for a fact are major donors to multiple different organizations, pay their employees really well, pay for their kids' college or education. And so you look at that and you're like, well, I can see why people might not want the stress of their job. And I can see why people might just want to work in a coffee shop and just barely get by or something. But I can also see why people would want to model their life after this person, because of course they have their own struggles, but they're putting all of their money into kind of their legacy, so to speak. Not in a prideful way, but they've got their family set up. They have a house, they have cars, their kids are going to school. They're at all of these charity events. They're making massive donations to build a new church, to build a new school.
Sure.
And not everyone's called to that, but when you see that, you're like, wow, okay, that's a good way to channel the money that I make. And maybe I, at a certain point, decide, you know what, I'm not going to take that promotion because I'd rather be home more. And you can do that.
I understand, but I would debate, locally I would debate some of that. I think there's plenty of people locally here, and bless them all, but I think there's some who don't pay their employees fairly. I think there's some real injustice locally, and I'm not going to name names. That's not appropriate.
Let's get the sheet out. Right?
No, that's not, how about no names? But there really is a challenge where there are fat cats in our community, and there's some very poor families. We have a community here that's very much a humanae vitae community. Let's do this for God. Let's have kids. Let's not practice contraception. Let's be open to life. But I would say, what is the economic basis to support this Catholic pro-life community? Where's the money that supports this? You're a young family man. If your kids want to stay here, how are they going to stay? Are there jobs for our kids here? And there's really not. There's educational opportunities, but there's no real industry. There's no real economic basis to support this wonderful Catholic community. So I'm very interested in bringing those economic opportunities here. A number of us have been meeting and talking about
I would definitely be curious as to what those would look like. Because there are, fortunately now, there's a lot of online opportunities. I know several different moms locally work for Seton, and they do grading. And I'm not saying that that's the only option. There's plenty of other things you could do. But they enjoy reading and writing papers, correcting. And so they're like, I'm kind of teaching. I'm in a teaching capacity, but I can do it at home, and it's 1 hour a day, and I make a modest salary. And that's some extra spending money. And it's a way to get outside of the household without actually leaving it. So there's always opportunities like that. But I would be curious, what does a small community typically thrive on? Because we're kind of a unique community where we're not a city. people aren't getting paid lots of money to be big speakers and do
Sure.
politics and things like that.
Sure.
But an hour away in DC, that's what everyone's doing.
Right, exactly.
But here, but we're also not a really poor town where everyone here, goes to the same place to get their haircut. And
Right.
we're not like a Mayberry town,
Right,
even
right.
though we have that feel sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are people that have serious money here and have serious, legitimate construction, roofing,
Sure.
whatever businesses
Right.
that support the area and, within an hour of here. So I think that there are opportunities, but yeah, I guess I would just be curious what would be an industry to bring here that would benefit everyone, not only in terms of salary, but also would be good for the community.
Right,
Is
right.
it more Catholic infrastructure? Is it, what? I mean, I
So
assume more trades.
We're doing a lot of thinking about it. I'm not ready to lay out specifics, but there's quite a bit of talk about what is the economic basis for this So there's no real decisions yet, but but there needs to be some more cash. Again, the price of rentals are high, the rentals are higher than mortgages.
Yeah.
And that's because people can't qualify for the mortgages. Well, that whole system doesn't work for family life. That mitigates against the young fathers.
Right.
Too much pressure on the dad, pressures on the mom to go to work. So all that whole system, I think there's real problems here that's mitigating against the very thing that we love so much, the openness to life.
Yeah.
So it needs to be some more solid economic opportunities here.
Sure.
And again, where do the kids work?
Yeah.
Is everybody going to have to work at Spelunkers? Or
Right.
whatever, which is not always a good influence. Our families work there on and off, right?
Yeah.
But so there's real challenges that are coming for Front Royal. This is an increasing community. Demographically, this is gaining in momentum. You're from a large family, now you're staying and you're having a family. Mm-hmm. I predict that historically Front Royal will be a diocese because of this.
No kidding.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it kind of demographically speaks to, look at the intensity of focus that's here. In a different culture here in the Appalachia, we're kind of doing things differently.
Yeah.
Not against the Arlington. I love the Arlington diocese, but there's a different culture developing in our community that I think historically will lead to. So interesting. I know your family background a little bit. So let's talk a little about
Sure. Be happy to.
about the Father Gallitzin.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's a fascinating connection.
It is. How is your family connected with?
I know
with that?
just your family's connected with that.
Yeah. Are you as well? Or
No, I'm not.
Oh, you
I
just know about it.
I know
Okay.
it from your
Okay.
dad. I know about
Yeah.
your connection.
I should know more of the history. I don't know a lot. But I know, as far as I'm aware, we trace a lot of our roots back to Loretto, Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
and to him. And I know that he took in a lot of adopted kids. Yeah. And my understanding is that one of my great-grandparents were one of those adopted kids and got married.
That's right.
Now, I don't know.
That's what your dad told me.
Yeah, so that's as far back as I know. I don't know if there's any other people. I know we have other family members. There's a James Criste, I think, that came over from Ireland in 1860 or something like that.
Yeah.
There's a few other family members that seem to be distant relatives. There's Father Ambrose Criste out in California. Okay. He's a member of the Norbertine order out there.
Okay.
And I think he's distantly related as well. Third cousins, maybe.
Yeah.
Probably further, actually. But, spells it the same way, because
Yeah,
Criste is typically Crist.
Yeah.
So having the extra E is actually a distinguishing.
Special.
Yeah, there's not many people that have it if you look it up, or they have an H.
Sure.
Probably at one point we had, but
The reason I mention it, because I think the whole movement that God did through Father Gallitzin is parallel to what's happening here in Front Royal. Okay, so there's a whole thing that happened where he was the first American ordained priest, trained in Europe but ordained under Bishop Carroll in the year 1700, I think. Is that correct? Or 18?
I couldn't tell you, but around that time.
I think
for sure.
1800 was the first American ordination. It's 1800s, one of the hundreds. I think 1800. And he took up his apostolate in western Pennsylvania.
Yep, the Alleghenies. Yeah.
The Alleghenies, so Loretto. But there's a tremendous kind of plateau of American Catholicism that happened. And then the Carnegies came in, brought some serious cash in. And there's monasteries and there's universities and there's a whole thing that's still there kind of in remnants. And then there's been a decline of recognition. God is doing something like that in Front Royal. Some parallel of the Father raising up a Catholic people.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in the history of Loretto and the history of the families. There's a number of families here descended from Loretto. So fascinating. Stu Nolan's descended from people in Loretto. Betty Belk is from Loretto area. So these prominent parishioners are from that descendancy. But I'm fascinated by our people, what is it that God wants to do with us, and how can we best serve God with each other here? So those are big, and again, trying to think big picture on this. Who's going to be thinking about these things? Right? So I'm very active with the Knights of Columbus, for example. And the reason is, in a parish like this, where are the people doing the business of the men of the parish? It's a big place. And there's a very complex, very intense community. But who's thinking about the business of the layman? The Knights are. So that's what draws me to the Knights. I'm very active with the Knights. I was your dad's deputy Grand Knight years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so, it's a classic phrase we had with each other. This is not my father's Knights of Columbus Council. So I bring a lot of Quaker business practices to the Knights. So I'm still very enthralled with the Quaker business meeting.
What does that mean?
Right. So Quakers don't have voting. We have voting in the council, but Quakers operate on a basis called consensus, where they come to unity together. They come to agreement on things. Okay? And so I'm a big encourager in our council with fraternity and brotherhood to come to agreement, to labor with each other, and come to agreement on things versus voting against each other. So if someone has an idea, I want to support them to take it to fruition. It doesn't matter if it's my idea or their idea. Yeah, but to bring whatever idea they have for the community, to bring it to fruition. So I'm a big supporter, kind of behind the scenes, supporting this and that activities. And I have some ideas myself, but I love that cooperative efforts. Whatever we can do together to serve Christ and serve each other and help each other. And that to me is a big activator. It comes from my background, but it's very much applicable right here with the Knights of Columbus. But instead of voting against each other, we're always going to find ways to support each other.
Is that just because you think that it can cause like infighting and bad
absolutely.
blood to
Sure.
Everyone voted and this one guy didn't raise his hand and so now he's kind of against me,
No, well, I've seen it in the council, for example. There's a dear brother who had a great idea years ago and went on the limb to promote this whole idea. It was a great idea, but he's the only one who wanted to do it. And the council voted against it. I was there. But he got sour about the whole thing, and now he's left the council. He's left the church. So it's a sadness to me to see we didn't take the opportunity to support a good idea. So to me, everybody, it doesn't matter if it's every idea is a good idea. If it's not against the faith.
Yeah.
If it's something that's for the household of faith, let's do this.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to bring yourself and be vulnerable and bring yourself, let's go.
Try it, yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Take whom sto. Do you know that phrase?
No.
So a dear friend of mine, a Latin scholar, taught me this. Take whom sto. T-E-S-C-S-T-O. Take whom, T-E-C-U-M.
Yeah.
S-T-O. Take whom sto. I'm with you. It's an idiom. I'm with you. You got a good idea? Take whom sto. Let's do this.
Yeah. No, I think that does generally tend to work better. I know when you were saying that, it made me think of there's some rules that the Disney Corporation has, and when you're talking about brainstorming, it's forbidden to just straight up disagree. You can't just say no. So what you say is, if you actually think this is a terrible brainstorming idea, it would never work, you say no, and then because. So no, because of this reason. And that gives the person an opportunity to say, no, actually, I thought about that objection, and here's my solution.
Sure.
But the better way to do it is either just yes or yes and. Or you say, yes, I like that idea, and I think I know someone who could do it better or could help or whatever, because we want to support this. And you have the energy and the foresight, so yes, let's do it, and also let's try to make it better. Not just, I don't really see it, I'm not personally interested, so no. Because I think a lot of good ideas go down the drain because there wasn't 3 or 4 people to agree with someone.
Well, it wasn't support. I think as men, we need to support each other. We need to, it's the band of brothers thing.
Yeah.
It's being willing to serve God in the community. Again, taking the responsibility for the business of the layman in the parish. This isn't just what Father wants to do. Again, I wasn't raised Catholic.
Yeah.
So I don't even ask permission before I start a project. Would it be okay if I do? I just do.
Yeah.
If it's the right thing, we just do it. Serve God. If it's serving God, now of course we'll get the priest's blessing and we'll get their support. But a lot of stuff that I've started in the parish, I just start.
Yeah.
It's not about, is it okay if because I don't have that,
The Catholic guilt.
I don't have the Catholic guilt. I love the church, obviously, but I don't have I don't have to ask permission for something good. God did this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But then learning how to work with each other. Where is the ability of men to cooperate with each other and to support each other?
Yeah.
How do we fashion this and build this? The scripture says, as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens. Well, we need to actually have some opportunity to conflict with each other in love. We're going to disagree, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's wrestle. Let's do this.
Yeah.
For God.
Yeah, I think I think it was last night. I had some guys over for St. Joseph's Day, and we had some cigars, and we're hanging out and talking, and we were talking about the Amish work ethic,
right?
And how that, not that we should emulate the Amish in all ways,
right?
Obviously, but I was talking to this guy, and I was like, no, but there is, because we were actually talking about very similar things we're talking about now. Where he's an electrician by trade. And he was saying that in the electrician kind of community, he's like, I know all these businesses because we come in, we do their quotes, we do their work, we give them a good deal, we pay our workers well, and we have a lot of business because there's a lot of work to be done.
Right.
But he was saying a lot of the other trades are dying because either people don't know how to promote themselves or they were never trained to do tile or carpentry or whatever.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, but there is something about a community coming together and doing these things, and that won't be true for everything. But he was like, I think he used the example of like a house building, which in the Amish world the stereotype is the barn building.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, and there is something to that, where there's a group of 50 men who all have jobs, all have their own responsibilities, but they're willing to take 5 days off work and say, you pay for the materials and we're going to build you a barn in a week. And all of us are going to build you a barn. And then that helps us, because then when we need a barn to rent out for our event or whatever, we built this barn. So like we kind of have part ownership in this community barn that is technically owned by the one guy, but we all helped you build it as a community.
Sure.
And I think if you extend that to housing, yeah, you could have some benefactors buy property, section it off, say we're going to cover X amount of the materials, your down payment is whatever, you still have a mortgage, but it's way more affordable, and we're going to have local businesses come and bid this at a fair wage, and you can help. Like, you can learn how to frame your own house. If you know how, you can do it cheaper. You can frame your own house and get a $500,000 house for $200,000.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big supporter of this.
I know there's people in the community that want to do that, but there's just a lack of, like, who's fronting the money, who's organizing this. But if you could get a community together to do that, everyone that wants a house would be on board, and I think everyone that is better off would want to buy in. Like, why would that be a bad thing? Like, why do we really want more apartment complexes, or do we want 3-acre plots with nice homes that
support family life,
rentals, and that support family life, safe communities, and you can buy 10 acres with your friends and build 5 houses.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah, it's just a lack of money.
No, of course. Well, the Amish are a great inspiration for me too. Again, the Quakers are not Anabaptist in the same way, but the philosophies are similar: pacifism, communitarianism. In the Anabaptist communities, like the Amish, the Brethren, the Bruderhof, the Mennonites, the Hutterites. I've actually worked with some Hutterites. I had a carpenter working for me for years who's a Hutterite, so sharing those philosophies. So many of the traditional Anabaptist communities don't believe in insurance. And the gospel imperative is that I help my brother when he's in need. And so if I have insurance that pays for my damage, whatever happens, a hurricane, whatever, then I've deprived my brother of my gospel duty to him to help him when he has a need.
Right.
That's how they put it to me. So there's no insurance in the traditional communities, so they just come together and help each other. Can you imagine a Catholic community with no insurance? Because we trust God and each other. Now, do we have it together enough to be? How come all these tourist buses go to the Amish to see them? They should be coming here to see us. If we really have the gospel together, we're going to hold some things in common. We're going to really do things to help each other. Well, where is that? We're not there yet. We don't trust God enough yet to not have insurance. Can you imagine? On a religious principle, not having insurance?
And it's such an interesting thing, too, because it's not that everyone went out and got insurance and then now all of a sudden their community's not helping them. It's the reverse problem. It's their community's not helping them. Therefore, when something goes wrong, they need insurance, and this policy is fairly cheap, so they get insurance.
I've got plenty of insurance, buddy. I'm just
I'm just saying it's kind of flipped. It's not that I don't think it's that people got the insurance and that drove their friends away.
No,
it's
I know.
That, it's the community breaks down, and so then that's your only option. And it's also required if you have a mortgage, you have to have insurance.
Exactly. But if we're self-funding, like you're talking about, if we're self-funding and we're actually committed to helping each other if there's a problem, so there's really something that they're teaching us with the work ethic too.
Yeah.
You realize that in the Amish community, traditional Amish communities, they have a high 90 percentile of retention of their kids. They stick with it. So historically, in the farming areas of America, these Anabaptist communities, the Amish, the list I gave, are historically going to take over the farming lands and be the biggest Christian denomination because they're sticking with it. They're having large families with great retention. Really something.
Yeah.
So I think as Catholics, we can be, I'm kind of a Catholic Amish philosophy. I don't accept all their philosophies by any means, but we can definitely help each other. So what are we doing to come alongside and help each other? That would be the challenge for this community.
Yeah.
We're not doing enough, that's for sure.
And I think that's a good, just kind of a good thing to chew on. Like what, because I think that you're not alone in thinking that there's a problem, or at least a potential problem.
Sure.
And if we want to sustain a Catholic community, and this isn't even for Front Royal either, and I know Steubenville is trying to do a lot of this type of stuff, and I think that we should probably do more of what they're doing when they have their big First Friday festivals, and they have everyone come out, and they've got their own shops that are self-funded. Yeah. So they're starting to go that direction.
Sure.
But part of the reason they're able to do that is because Steubenville is an abandoned steel town. So everything's cheap. Like I can afford some of the buildings on Main Street.
Right.
$5,000 for a building. Right. That's impossible here.
Correct.
So you don't have the money has way more value there, and so you're able to buy properties and build houses and things like that if you have the manpower. So they're kind of lacking the manpower, and they have a decent sized community with the university, but there's not a lot of people that are there that aren't related to the university. Whereas Front Royal is very independent from Christendom. It helps. It goes, there's a back and forth relationship. But Front Royal is a thriving community regardless of the college.
Very much so.
So it's kind of an interesting thing that they're doing over there. And I've talked to a few different people about trying to get like big celebration, like Oktoberfest type things. I love it. It's like, that's what we need to do. You need to have these big community building events, and you have to have people start their own companies and have food trucks and all that.
Do you remember the Celtic Festival?
I remember the St. Gregory's Festival.
Yeah.
Was that the same thing, or was that different?
Nope. St. Greg Festival was before that, but so for 3 years, I did a Front Royal Celtic Festival along these same lines. Okay. To take the natural evangelism of our parish and to evangelize the community. Yep. So our girls were doing Irish dancing at that point. And so we had the Father O'Kelty Irish dance group at our house. Great. Remember Father O'Kelty, right? Yeah. And so the girls, Jessica Inzio was teaching our girls Irish dance, the Townsends and us and everybody. And so then I did this festival for 3 years. 1 year at Rivendell, which is now Chelsea, and 2 years right here in downtown. So we had a bagpipe parade that came from St. John's to the gazebo for 2 years in a row. It was awesome. Yeah. We took the whole Main Street the first year. Wow. And then we took just the gazebo area the third year we did this. Yeah. But it was great. We had clam tents and caber tossing, and it was a cheap price. And we never made money, but it was all about Catholic evangelism. Yeah. So then we did this 9, 10, and 11 right during the period where there was all the questioning. Are priests perverts? So any Catholic priest is going to grab you. Okay. Yeah. So I realized that I wanted to do something to challenge the cultural motif here in Front Royal that all priests are creepy. So I took the centermost booth on the corner of Chestnut and Main, and I had a big banner made that said "Faithful Catholic Priests," and the vocations director for the diocese and Father Fasano came and sat in there, along with some associate pastors. And there's a priest sitting there in public, and here's a faithful Catholic priest, and they're sitting there. So challenging the public mode that all priests are creeps. Here's a priest, deal with it. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I wanted to do another one, never did it, but I wanted to do another big sign that said "Men Against Pornography," and just challenge in a public way, challenge the concept that all men are perverts. Well, we're not. Right. We want to be disciplined, self-controlling. We love God. We going to respect women,
Yeah.
and not look at pornography.
There was this really funny story I heard Matt Fradd. He's got his Big Pints with Aquinas show. And
Yeah.
He was telling this story, and I don't think it was on his actual podcast. I think it was on his. He does videos for like his members, so I pay $10 a month, and I get his interviews a couple weeks early, and just support him. I think it's a great cause.
Sure.
And but he told this little story that he was on a plane, and the guy in front of him was scrolling some very questionable videos.
Yeah.
And he was like, and his daughter, I believe, was next to him. And so he was thinking about it, and he was kind of confessing to his audience. He was like, yeah, and the kind of the disgusting thing was, for a minute I thought, I'm not going to say anything. And then he thought, no, what are you talking about?
Sure.
Like, there are other people on this flight.
Right.
My child's on this flight.
Right.
And so he made a big deal of it. He's like, what are you looking at? And he made the guy feel embarrassed. And he was like, I didn't want to do that because it's a hard thing to do. But he was like, this is so blatantly obvious. And it's so disgusting.
Yeah.
I don't want my daughter to be exposed to this. And how dare you sit in front of us? If you're at your home, whatever.
Right.
I don't agree with it, but it's not affecting me.
Right.
But if you're on a public flight
Yeah.
and you get mad, like, what are you going to do? You stand up to me and start yelling at me that you're defending pornography? Yeah, go. I would love to see that.
Go for it.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so he told that. I was like, I think that's really great. I think there's an energy there, and it could be absolutely misconstrued, and it could be absolutely misused. But there is that masculine energy of calling out sin and of correcting your brethren.
That's right.
And it can be done with charity. You know, he didn't say, he wasn't cussing him out. He wasn't, and you know, it was done with charity. But it was, hey, bucko, what are you doing?
That's right.
My daughter's here. Can you please put that away?
If we don't confront the evil, what kind of men are we?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we don't confront the evil, by the way, I'm no longer a pacifist. I have that background, but there has to be confrontation.
Yeah.
There has to be manly confrontation. Men have to have courage, and then go together as a band of brothers, not just solo activity, but go together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you good to keep going? You want to take a break?
We can take a break, brothers.
Okay, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. As promised, we're going to get into talking about some gold mining. So. Maybe a little bit of context on that. You originally lived in California.
Yep.
What caused you to move out to Front Royal? And then after that, what caused you to go back to California and start a gold mine?
So I told you in the first session about the conversion process. But in the middle of that, raising a family in the Monterey Diocese and increasing tensions with the, I'll say, heterodox bishop. And I've got, like I said, I've got a froom, I've got an orthodox soul. I want to do things right. I want to follow God. I'm not here to invent my own religion. Kind of a reaction from the Quaker background is I'm not here to make my own way. I want to do what God wants and do it God's way, not my way. And so just tensions, increasing tensions with pastors out there and the bishop in particular, who's, God bless him, but at that point was a real freak, who's directing us. For example, he was directing us in writing, you must not kneel after receiving Holy Communion. You must stay standing until everybody's received. And this fellow at the time was the head of the USCCB Liturgy Committee. And he's directing us in writing, you can't kneel after receiving Holy Communion. So we came to visit here, and we're looking for places. We looked at Steubenville, we looked here, but we came here to visit. And there's all these large families just streaming in Holy Communion. Everybody's kneeling after Mass. And I just started crying. I said to Deanne, I want to raise our kids with this out of respect for the Eucharist. I know that I'm changed. When I receive the Eucharist, I'm a different man. On the way walking up, I love receiving at the altar rail kneeling, right? And then I'm changed by the Eucharist. He's in me. And I'm asking him to be more part of me. So I'm becoming spiritualized, divinized by Christ. And so there's a posture appropriate with being changed by Jesus, which is kneeling for me, okay? I'll actually just try to relax after receiving Holy Communion. I'm not trying to kneel hard up. I'm just relaxing and accepting Jesus in my heart, But here's this bishop saying, you must stand. You cannot kneel. And I was one of the few families, I kind of insisted our family keep kneeling because I believe he's present. This is the same bishop that had just built a church with, I'm complaining, but he's a bishop who just built a church with no kneelers. Big old Catholic church. Big place, very wealthy area with no kneelers. you know?
Intentionally.
Intentionally.
Yeah.
Like against kneeling and against, so just, it's what it is. But so tensions with the bishop, coming to this Orthodox place, looking for a better place to raise the kids so we're not getting influenced by all the perversion issues, right?
Yeah.
So we came lock, stock, and barrel. So I set the record for bringing a milk cow to Front Royal the longest distance. So I currently hold the record of bringing Bonnie, our cow, from Watsonville, California to Front Royal. So we had a small farm. We had a farm called Little Flower Farm. I built the family a big home, and we had 10 acres. I had a certified organic farm, had a big construction company, had 30 guys working for me, and had some financial reversals, but made a lot of money, did a lot of work for the church, the construction, typical boom and bust. But so we had to leave our farm, and we had to leave the house that I built for the family, beautiful replica Victorian home. But we did. And so coming here was not a good business decision because I made a lot more money out west.
Yeah.
But for the faith, this is absolutely. Do you know the phrase? Have you heard the phrase like a clam in mud? Is a phrase you recognize?
It sounds like it would be a phrase, though.
Yeah, it's a real phrase. I'm like a clam in mud here in Front Royal because I love the interconnectedness. It's what I've come to call the fabric of orthodoxy. Like the connection between the families. We talked a little about Loretto and the connections. I love putting people together in connections and situations. And it's the great weaving of Christ. Jesus is doing this. And we have a chance to go along with that program or resist the Father's weaving. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's not about any person. God is weaving the fabric of orthodoxy. So I love the interconnections between all the Orthodox communities, the people serious about the faith.
Yeah.
I thrive in that world.
Was there a contingent? I've been thinking about this for probably 3 years now. And you were on my list of people to ask. But it seems like there was a fairly large contingent of people, and I don't know if they're from the same area, but they moved from California to Front Royal.
Absolutely.
And I was like, I can understand leaving California, but particularly for church-related reasons, because it's hard to find orthodoxy out there.
Right.
But why Front Royal, and also why? Yeah, like all of these, like the prices. I know that I think they're from San Francisco or outside of San Francisco.
The price is very similar.
But yeah,
the Del Mars,
the Del Mars. There was a whole group of people, and it seemed like they all moved kind of at the same time.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out, is it because of Christendom? They knew people at Christendom? Did they just hear about Front Royal? Like, who did they know in Front Royal to say, okay, this is the place we're going to go? Because it seemed like it all happened just in a couple of years. There was this big group of migration of people that just came to Front Royal.
We're part of that migration pattern for sure. And it really centers around a parish called Our Lady of Peace in Santa Clara. And so Father Monsignor Sweeney started this parish in the middle of an industrial area of San Jose. And he established altar rails, and he established confession available whenever somebody wanted to hear confessions.
Right, not once a month, yeah.
Right. And so this is a place that then thrived in orthodoxy. The parish boundaries include an all-industrial area, but people came because of orthodoxy. So perpetual adoration is the first place in the country to have 24/7 adoration.
In the country?
In the country. So Ted and Mary Margaret Price came to Front Royal from Our Lady of Peace, from the Shrine of Our Lady of Peace. Okay. They started the adoration program here.
Oh, they still run it, I think, right?
No, they've now moved from the area.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh. Ted and Mary Margaret have moved down to Richmond area. They come and visit a lot, but they're out. They've now moved. Mary Margaret said to me, she said, if you guys have some condos here, we'll come back. But they're looking for a less expensive retirement place.
Sure. Okay.
Catherine Briggs is doing the coordination now for the adoration.
Okay.
Yeah. But so they brought their 14 kids to Front Royal. And then John and Lisa Del Mar came, bringing 12 kids. Yeah. And Joe and Roxanne Miller came with their 9 kids. Yeah. Right. So these big families. So we heard about it. We're in the Monterey Diocese next to the San Jose Diocese. And so we heard about it. We were going to Our Lady of Peace for Orthodoxy already, going up there for First Holy Communions and the Tridentine Mass. And we'd commute, an hour and a half away to go to really good Orthodoxy at Our Lady of Peace. I was there one time with Cardinal Sin from the Philippines with 10,000 in a Marian procession. And Cardinal Sin had just shut down the Catholics had just shut down the fascist Marco Remember that whole thing with praying the rosaries, or nuns in front of praying in front of these tanks, praying rosaries, and the guys in the tanks stopped and got out and honored the people praying the rosaries. So this conversion, and then Marco, the fascist guy in the Philippines, fled the country, and it was a Catholic revolution. And Cardinal Sin, that's the name of the guy, he's the cardinal in the Philippines, had coordinated this whole rosary praying conversion of the country. So he spoke at Our Lady of Peace. It was 10,000 people. Wow. So it's an incredible experience of hearing directly from this thing that just happened. Catholic movement with rosaries to stop the fascist. It's great. And then they took over the fascist. I don't know that they've done that well since then, but this tremendous thing happened to break away from fascism. It was not a violent revolution. It was a rosary revolution. Tremendous. So we were inspired by meeting those people to come here. And looking for a better place. And so we heard about Front Royal from godparents of ours, and so came. And so again, I set the record for the longest milkcast. So
how did you do that? Was that just back of the truck or trailer?
Yeah, we had a buddy of ours that drove a lot of my construction up across country, and then towed Bonnie in the horse trailer behind the construction truck. Okay? Had a big dump truck and hauled all my best stuff out here. Yeah. So then I built a construction company here, always small because there's a lot of competition in construction, but made a living for the family. And then the price of gold went up back in 2012. So I better back up before 2012. So my own family background on my father's side were gold miners, going back to the early gold rush.
Of the 49ers?
Yeah. Okay. So an uncle of my great-grandmother came to the gold rush in the 1850s from Alsace-Lorraine. They came on the boat around Cape Horn from Germany, the French-German border. In the family home was German and French, the Bockles family. And they came to the early gold rush, but the uncle of my great-grandmother came first and must have sent gold back to the old country because the young couple came, my great-grandparents, and then had 12 kids up in the remote high Sierras, a Catholic family. So you heard the whole history of my conversion and my baptism. It was after my baptism that a family friend said to me, Mike, didn't you know your grandfather was Catholic? And nobody had ever told me. That my own grandfather and the whole generation, and my father was actually baptized Catholic, but I didn't know before my baptism. So there's an unbroken line of Catholic baptism on my father's side.
Wow. Going
back to Middle Europe in Alsace-Lorraine, which is a great meaning for me today.
Yeah.
There's, tremendous patrimony.
Yeah. A lot of comfort too.
A lot of comfort, of course. And they've been praying for me. So every year I go back to the graveyard where they're all buried. I go there on All Souls Day, and I pray the traditional Requiem Mass in the graveyard. Have for years now. So it's part of the reason I'm out there in that part of the time of year whenever I can. Unless the weather's too inclement, I'll go there on All Souls Day and I'll pray in the cemetery. And I bring the local parishioners with me. It's a big thing we do. So the Requiem Mass has come to mean a tremendous amount for me. So I really have a duty to pray for all my people. It's a big, big deal for me. Yeah, we have the opportunity as Catholics to. See, every Catholic should know the traditional Requiem Mass. When there's trouble, what do you do when disaster hits? Then you know how to hit the deck with the Requiem. If you don't have that tool in your belt, what do you do when there's real trouble that comes down? But it's in me, right? I can come out with the Requiem. I can pray. So the gold rush happened. My people have been in gold mining for 150 years, since the 1850s. And so I knew that from my own family. My dad was a geologist, so I was always interested in the gold thing. I was a rock collector as a kid, And but when we moved here in 2006, the price of gold is $400 an ounce. It wasn't worth doing. I thought about it. I thought, we're going to make a switch. What are we going to do? But it wasn't worth doing at $400 an ounce. Today it's like well over 3,000 an ounce. It's crazy. But I decided in 2012, when gold was spiking up at, I think, 1,800 for a short moment, that I ought to take a look at this. So I had a whole career in construction. I worked as a union carpenter, served an apprenticeship in the union after I got out of college, and then worked 40 years in construction. Still, I'm a master carpenter. I'm good at what I do, but frustrated with the lack of intellectual ability in the construction world. People aren't thinking about solving the problems. They're just kind of following what they think they know. So I'm frustrated with construction and frustrated with the loyalties in construction and the lack of training, right? So there's the whole thing there. People aren't willing to pay enough for real quality.
Yeah.
Right. There's real knowledge in how to really do things. So I still work construction, but I do more specialized things like copper flashings on old buildings and stuff like that.
Really cool.
Yeah. I've got a job going in Strasbourg where I do my own soldering and I do my fashioning, and it's like origami.
Yeah.
And then you solder it together. It's fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of
fun.
fun.
Like fun.
In fact, tomorrow I'll be doing some of that. So it's fun. Up on the roof.
To send me some pictures of that.
I've got some great stuff. It's fun.
Okay.
And it's something I'm good at. So, but still frustrated intellectually with construction and wanting to have more, again, intellectual, go back to my science background from the university, because I was physics and biochemistry. So what I'm doing with the gold is really, I've gone back to the historic mines near where the family worked. I went back there in 12 looking for an opportunity, and I found several and developed one of them called the Primrose Mine. And now we've ended up buying the Primrose. And now we're in a deeply scientific process with geophysical studies and stuff like that. We're actually finding underground what we're looking for, and pretty exciting. Mm. So I've been recruiting from Christendom and Franciscan and Wyoming Catholic and kids from Phoenix to come and help work. And now I'm looking for career opportunities for young men who want to make a career in mining. Hmm. I'm actually trying to build a whole company based on the distributism model, where the workers actually own the company. Okay. So I'm really serious about it.
So I guess, let's talk about mining. So you initially, with the Primrose Mine, you didn't own it. So were you renting it, or was this, how did that, before you owned it, what was that?
Sure. So I went up to the owners and I said, look, I'm interested in working on this. Can I have a mineral rights contract for this? And so I got a California contract that we signed. But then there was troubles with an old man who was there whose grandfather used to have the place, and he was my friend. And then he turned against me and pushed us off the place. And so the big lawsuit that issued from that. So I sued them in federal court in California, and I won with an escrow to buy the Primrose with an agreement. Couldn't fund it right away, but found a priest a Christendom priest, Father Ramos. Mm-hmm. Long great story of how that happened. Father Ramos bought the Primrose. Wow. And so it's owned in a trust that's managed from here. Father Ramos is now deceased, may he rest in peace. But so now we don't own it yet. We have rights to buy it, kind of thing. Okay. We have but we have security there. Okay. Daniel Clark is the trustee that owns the Primrose. It's a whole complicated. Yeah. Father Andrew's father, Daniel and Laura Clark. Yeah. So it's a whole long story there, but.
As all good business stories with gold mining are, yeah.
Exactly, right, exactly. But fascinating, the man who had, Richard Seabreck, the fellow who was my friend, first identified to me as a Catholic man. I first met him. So I've been praying for Richard, and then he turned against me, and literally some guns came out, and they pushed us off the property. That was the basis for the lawsuit. But now Richard and I are reconciled as of last year. So there's this Catholic man who was a friend and then a real hard enemy, and now is a friend again. He's in the hospital. I call him every week. He's back in the sacraments in the hospital. Chaplain's coming to visit him. He said, Mike, I'm so happy to be back in the church. I've wanted this for years. It's a long, long, hard story, hard times, but a wonderful man, friend, enemy, now friend. So I'm so grateful. Yeah, so tremendous connections. I've got some good friends out there in the local parish. Some men come and help. And technically now we're in a really good position to make some good progress. Okay. We're in a really, really good. We've raised close to $1 million with a grubstake model, which you probably never heard of a grubstake.
No, I don't know what that is.
So the way the gold rush originally was funded was, say, Anthony, if you'll stake me, if you'll help buy my blankets and my donkey and my pickaxes, I'll give you a percentage of what I find. So the grub stake.
Okay.
Right?
So it's like an investor.
Yeah, it's an investor scenario, but very different, because the grub stake model is I actually give you a percentage of what I find, not a percentage of my profits. Right? So it's a different economic model. So we've raised close to $1 million with that. Now we've formed a Virginia Stock Corporation. We're selling stock. So we have a whole different approach. we're kind of weaning ourselves from the grub stake, because you give away too much of your primary product, gold.
Yeah.
That kind of weakens the business long term.
Yeah.
But we haven't given away too much yet.
Yeah.
So
how are you selling the stocks? Is it a percentage of the company? Is it a percentage
it's
of
ownership in the company?
It's ownership. Okay.
Right. So now we have JM Joseph Incorporated, which is a company that owns JMJ Mining, which is the grubstake company, and Primrose Group, which owns the Primrose contract, and the claims.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's two kinds of land out in the West. There's in Sierra County, California. There's two kinds of land. There's patented land, and there's federal land. Most of Sierra County is still federal land that can be claimed on. So I don't know if you know about the mineral claims.
No, what's that?
So in 16 or 17 Western states, there's 250 million acres of federal land that never got privatized. That's still open to mineral claims. It's the Spanish land grant land. So it's the whole West. So, like I say, 16, I think maybe 17 states. And so you can walk out in the woods, you can see something that you like, you mark the corners of your claim, you record the notice of that location with the local recorder's office, and you have exclusive rights to the minerals from that the federal land. And that,
So what's stopping you from staking out thousands of acres?
You're limited. Each person or organization is limited.
Okay.
And it costs money.
Okay.
But you're limited. There's limits involved. So you have to pick out things that are reasonable. But we've identified an ancient river system right near the Primrose. The Primrose is largely a hard rock opportunity. And we've got the platinum group metals mixed in the gold opportunities. The PGMs are huge today. We have rhodium, which is used in catalytic converters. We have critical minerals that President Trump in his speech to Congress mentioned are important. We're going to have more critical minerals here. We have them at the Primrose. So we're interested in working.
And are some of those worth more than gold?
Yeah, they are. Rhodium's like 3 times gold.
Okay.
It's crazy.
Okay. So if you dug and never found gold, but you struck it rich with rhodium,
right?
Who cares? You'd be fine.
Correct. And rhodium is a big financial opportunity that's extremely difficult to extract. 85% of rhodium's dealt with down in South Africa. There's only one place in the country that deals with rhodium. So it's a whole nother, it's a complex, technical, fun situation, but potentially very lucrative, but very difficult to get out. Gold's easy to get out compared to these fancier critical minerals.
Okay.
But with the geophysical stuff we've done, we can actually see the gold deposits underground on the hard rock.
How?
So there's hard rock mining. So you do these conductivity and induced polarization studies, and you can look straight down. Whoops. And you're actually seeing microphone adjustment.
Yeah.
So at some point, if you want to get together, it's back here.
It's that one. Yeah, there you go.
Microphone's back. Cool, man. So with the geophysical studies, we can see the gold underground. We can see the conductivity.
Okay.
So that's there's two kinds of mining. There's lode mining, which is the hard rock, and there's placer mining, which is river situations. So we've got a hard rock opportunity that's big, but we also have this ancient river situation that we've discovered that kind of runs through the Primrose and adjoins onto claims. So this will make sense to you based on the previous discussion.
Yeah.
We have the Colby Pio mineral claims for St. Colby and St. Pio.
Okay.
Right, the men.
Yeah.
I mean, And so we have the Colby Pio claim, which encompasses the beginning of this Paleo Valley, this ancient river system. And we can see it underground. I can see a river meander. I can see the shape of a river. I can see the deepest conductivity along the meander. That represents a stream gradient mathematically. And we're able to predict further down the canyon, and we see more of it coming down the hill. I don't know where yet, but we're searching and looking for more of the same underground ancient river system. And this is the kind of place where the really big nuggets are.
Yeah.
So that's our first kind of primary target in the short term is this river system. So pretty exciting.
Yeah. So what's the investment that's required to actually dig down there and dig for gold or extract these different minerals, and then what's the potential payout of
Sure.
that?
So that's a whole. I don't want to get into the specifics of the investments, the whole thing. We can meet privately about that.
Yeah, sure.
And I can download on that till the moon is blue. I could talk days about this, but the takeaway is that the price of gold is crazy. Interestingly, consider this. How many companies would desire that their main product price be lowered? Okay. I desire that by finding a lot of gold, that we lower the price of gold, because we're going to do apostolic works that can make people feel more secure and the world is safer. Let me ask the question, why is gold so highly priced?
I mean, typically it's because you're talking about just gold in general or gold nowadays? I mean, well, anything that's valuable is priced because it's rare, right? So the less rare that it becomes, the less valuable it is, essentially. Right.
But gold also is overpriced, is super high priced right now. When my grandfather was working, my grandfather, a blessed memory, he was a gold miner his entire life. He was born in 1874 and died in 1969, and that's all he did for a living, was mine gold. When my grandfather was mining gold, it was $20 an ounce, and then it went up to $35 an ounce. And now it's over $3,000. Why? Okay. Part of why is that people are worried, and so gold is a hedge against the warring and against the problems.
Inflation, against
everything. It's a hedge. It's a hiding place. But it's because of insecurity. It mitigates the high prices, shows that it's not a very stable place for civilization. I believe in civilization, the very foundations of civilization. I want to promote that. And I think that we succeed, we build more safety, more security, it lowers the price of gold. So goal of our company is to lower the price of gold.
Okay. Yeah.
To do apostolic works.
Yeah.
To do apostolic works, that is a safer world to live in, that we're thinking longer term.
Yeah.
So my family's been doing this 150 years. I intend to build an organization that outlasts my life. I'm a short timer. Remember, I'm in overtime. So I want to think about doing things that are beyond me, big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is, I guess we don't have to talk about the like specific revenue of this.
Sure.
I mean, eventually, if it's going to make money, regardless of how it makes money, what could this potentially expand to? Like, this could be multiple crews of people that are making a living wage, digging for gold, selling stocks. Like, what?
Well, think about
how are all the different ways that people can be involved in making this a thriving company?
All the added value types things. So, for example, we're contemplating a jewelry business.
Okay.
So the nuggets of gold are fantastic for jewelry, and then gold from the situation that's melted. So nuggets and the specimen gold have an increased value over the melt gold. Specimen gold, like nuggets and streaks of gold and rock, are worth 3 to 4 times the melt value. There's a real multiplier, an added value. And so, but imagine jewelry then. Imagine having a jewelry factory here in Front Royal with trusted Catholic families and real skills being learned and making beautiful, beautiful jewelry, truth, beauty, and goodness, right? And then selling on Saks Fifth Avenue. So taking really, really exquisite product that's very rare and then selling it for a lot of money and funding this community. That's one concept. We could also have a factory here that dealt with the platinum group metals because they're extremely hard to deal with. So we could actually take some of the industrial land and build a PGM factory here. You're going to have to ship the place somewhere. The only other place that's being done is in Montana. So you're going to have to put it on the rail car to get it to Montana. So
it's not that much more expensive to
ship it all the way to Virginia. And the point is that I trust the families here. There's good families. And again, what can we do to make this a viable Catholic community? Not just jobs in education, construction, What about real money? Okay.
Why is the gold more valuable as a nugget or a streak rather than melting it down?
So it's like museum quality stuff. Anything like a nugget in a pan, anything bigger than a picker, which you can pick up with your finger, is worth exponentially more money. It can be up to 10 times more than just the melt value. Okay. It's just a thing. If you look up specimen gold online, you'll see it. Okay. Yeah, and then if you make it into jewelry, for example, Shazula, maybe 10 times. Right. So I'm really into added value stuff. Okay. And I'm a real proponent, again, from my own background, of the cottage industries. So what kind of specialties would you like to do? And let's train you in those specialties, and let's do things for God and family and for civilization. So supporting the cottage industries.
Okay.
And I can imagine thousands of cottage industries from our people.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because when Deacon Yergi came on last week, that episode just went live yesterday.
Cool.
But we were talking about him being a cobbler, which he was a cobbler for 25 years or something.
Right.
And we talked about that for quite a while. And I was like, I remember being a kid and my parents talking about that because no one, like, who's a cobbler? Like, do you know a cobbler? I don't know any other cobblers.
Right.
They exist. There are still cobblers out there, but decreasingly so. But yeah, just the fact that he would that full-time business to make shoes, saddles, whatever. It's like, that's a totally dying industry. No one's doing that because machines are doing it, but the quality of work is way lower. The quality of shoes are way lower.
Right.
But actually having these craftsmen who are making shoes out of real leather, making belts out of real leather, or in your situation, potentially making jewelry.
Sure.
Well, yeah, it's high end. It's expensive. But if you're getting married and you're buying someone a ring or you're buying someone a nice necklace, don't you want it to be nice? Don't you want to spend the extra $1,000? Yeah, but it's actually worth that. So where are you going to spend your money? And then additionally with that, you have the craftsmanship and the added bonus of, I know who made this.
Right.
And if I bring it back and it's broken, they're going to fix it.
Sure.
Right? You don't need a warranty.
That's right.
You know who fixed it. You know who put your roof on. You know who, kind of expands into these other things. It's like, you don't need these warranties, and it's like you have a handshake contract. We paid good money for this, and if it breaks, they're going to come fix it. And there's also an added security of that when you're friends with the person who made this piece.
Of course.
Just bonus.
Well, for example, think of something I'd like to address. You probably heard my sharing this earlier, but I'd love to find a way to address the exorbitant real estate prices.
Yeah. And
how to attack that. What are we going to do I would say the housing costs are a main opponent of Catholic family life. A pressure on a family to have less kids.
Yeah.
Education costs are there too, but the housing price right off the bat, how can I afford this? You go to a great school like Christendom, and many come out they're straddled with debt. So dealing with school debt is another goal that we've talked quite a bit about.
Yeah.
Funding the local schools. So if you want to go to Catholic schools, like the CETA program that I help promote. You remember Chris Cutterback?
Yeah.
Okay. So Chris had the CETA idea. It was his idea that I picked up. I'd heard about it, and I picked it up, brought it to our Knights of Columbus Council, and now we're promoting CETA for the parish. And the concept is we're supporting you have to be a parishioner, and if you have needs and you want to go to Catholic school, we'll help fund you. We want to raise several $1 million for that, so that it's an endowment with the diocese. Okay. And the concept is that historically will affect the education in Front Royal, so the kid doesn't have to go to public school. If the parents want to keep the faith, send them to real Catholic schools of your choice, whatever you want, whatever flavor you want. And it's limited to the least expensive of the Catholic schools, currently Padre Pio. Yeah. Right? But if you want to send your kids to Catholic school and have a Catholic education, some want to homeschool and some have the ability to homeschool. Others need to have a hybrid or support situation. But to increase the Catholicity of our people by not, encouraging them not to go to public schools, where they're getting brainwashed with all this, the woke stuff. Okay. But same thing with the housing market. How can we make an impact on the things that are affecting our Catholic families? And I'm not just talking about Front Royal, but if faithful Catholic families want to own their own place, is there a way we can come alongside and fund that? I'm very interested.
And I think, I as well. And I think that part of the problem with that is that I've seen is that, to your point, it is difficult to own a home because of the pricing. So it either causes the father to have to work multiple jobs, work a high-paying sales job. Maybe they're good at it, maybe they like it, but they have to. It's not because they want to or because that's what they enjoy. It's because they have to take that higher-paying job. May cause the wife to have to go work or work a part-time job in the home. But I think you could kind of repaint the scenario and say, no, we want a context in which if you want that high-paying sales job, great, you can buy property, you can build your own house. That should be, you get to live the American dream to the fullest because you're making this six-figure salary.
Sure.
But if you're just a normal person and you're making a livable salary, you shouldn't just be renting out a basement apartment. Maybe for the first year, that's fine. But if you're a couple years into getting married, you should be able to afford to buy a home and never have to feel like you have to go work a sales job. Like, you should be able to be a teacher at a local school and do that. And right now, I don't think that that's viable.
Correct.
And you see a lot of people who are teachers who, you know, or I shouldn't even say teachers in general, but I think teachers typically get paid lower. It's a low salary job a lot of times, particularly if you're teaching high school or something. But yeah, I mean, how are you supposed to buy a house on a $35,000 a year job? You can't. You never will be able to. You'll barely be able to afford rent.
And so
but how do you set up a scenario where you can afford that house and also say, no, I'm teaching children the faith. Maybe you're not even teaching Catholic classes, but you're an instructor of some kind, or you have a lower paying job, but that's what you want to do. How can you buy a house in that scenario? It's
not only what you want to do, it's what God's calling you to do. So how do we release the ministries in our community, the generosity, okay, and let people, the Quakers used to call that a ministry, where you're released, you're freed, you're enabled to serve God in what God's kind is confirmed by the community, but you're serving Christ. What about the missionary work? Not just working, but what about? So there's got to be ways with our creative genius in our community, the masculine geniuses and feminine geniuses, to come together and find ways to break out of this cycle. So, and God bless them all. Some of your listeners may not agree with this. Yeah. But I'm against real estate agents in general, and God bless them all. If you're out there listening to this,
real estate agents. Okay.
I am. Okay. I'm against this. What I call skimming. So that taking a percentage every single time, and that's part of the problem here. And the property managers have ganged together and raised all the prices together. So it's unreasonable. It's not fair. And so there's a cahoots that's going on, and now it's kind of, well, by necessity, Mike, we've got to do this, but we've got to break that cycle for the Catholic family. We have to make this affordable. So, I mean, I guess I'm utopian in that sense, but I want to find some way where we can fund, starting with our own company, we can fund our people to own homes. I don't know how that structures yet. We're talking about it. We're working. I've got some young men. We're talking about it. But if we have great success, the goal would be to do something with the housing situation. And I don't know what yet, but there's got to be something that can be done. Because again, it's a binding against, it's limiting Catholic family life, and that's totally uncool. So that's now an enemy of the faith. Yeah. Okay. And I'm saying no specific real estate guy is an enemy of the faith, but the structure of the system is antithetical to a Catholic family life. It's wrong. The system we're in is not supportive of Catholic families. It's not possible to own a place.
And I think you see that confirmed in kind of on the other side of the aisle, where people want the government to pay for housing. No. And of course, that's not the solution.
No, it's ridiculous.
But it is indicative of a problem where you're saying, yeah, I mean, there are people that have jobs that work hard and will never own a home.
Right.
Now, if you think the solution is the government should write you a check for that, you also probably think that welfare works.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
It doesn't work.
You can't pay someone to not work. You can't pay someone to live in a house. They have to work for it.
Yeah.
But there also has to be an incentive structure. Now, what that looks like on a federal level versus a state level, I don't know.
So this absolutely,
but there does need to be an incentive program, which to your point about if you're willing to work and build your own house, you should be able to save for a couple of years, apply to this program.
Yep.
The program has people that have, contractors that work for cheaper rates.
Yep.
They still make money. You can still make your payments. You get a modest home. You're able to resell that in 5 years, get a better mortgage, upgrade. You should be able to climb that ladder fairly quickly.
But
without being subsidized.
I'm totally against government subsidies. That's ridiculous. The duties here belong to the church, not the government. I'm very much a proponent of subsidiarity, which is a subset of distributism, right? So the problems need to get solved at the closest level as they can, in the families, in the community, in the parish, in the town, the city, the state, the country, the world. It's not my responsibility to pay for, to cover the children in Bangladesh who are starving, unless it's my specific calling by the grace of God, but it's not my mission. I've got to take care of our own. I've got to start close to home and build from there. So absolutely not the government's responsibility. But I would even challenge the concept that you're saying that there should be that you'd be able to sell back in the open market. I think if I was to fund something, it wouldn't be available to sell and make money on. Okay. But you'd have the security of the place for a long, long term. So different. So it's kind of, instead of the ability to keep running in this, I'm calling a skimming environment, where every time there's a sale, there's a cut, there's a cut, there's a cut. Part of my problem with this is having dealt with some Catholic realtors that, and this is more west than here, but there's some here, some issues like this here, that want to close the sale no matter what, even if it's not a correct situation. So I've been wrong this way as a carpenter. I've been forced to close sales when there's dishonesty involved. And I don't have to get into the great details of this.
Where they're going to make a profit off it, but it's not necessarily for your best interest.
There was a situation years ago. I'm a young carpenter supporting a young family. There's a place for sale right across the street from the church we were going to, from the parish we're at. It's one older Catholic couple selling to a younger Catholic couple and a Catholic realtor whose wife was the parish secretary. So it's awfully close to home. Okay. And I'm working in the house at Christmas time. It's raining. I've got to keep working because I don't have enough. I got to buy Christmas. I've got to provide for this young family, right? And I find a big nest of subterranean termites in this house. I uncover this mess in the first floor of this house. So I go to the realtor, who's the Catholic, who's the husband of the parish secretary, and I go, look, man, we got to do something. He says, Mike, I've got to close this sale. Cover it up. Cover it up, man. You don't say anything about it. Just cover it up. You want a job? So against my principles and against morality, I covered up the damn subterranean termites, you said cover it up, so I covered up, but I resented it. I still resent it. Years later, I got the neighbor to tell the young couple what actually happened, because they had a huge problem from this damn subterranean termites that the older Catholic couple had sold to them without knowing that they were there. So I'm stuck in the middle of a Catholic world, and I had to do wrong, and it was wrong to do that. And that's just an example of the drive to close the deal no matter what. And the pressure's on the real estate agent, bless their hearts, to close the deal in not always morality, right? So there's an example that I experienced as a young carpenter. I'm in wage slavery. I had to work, and I'm still frustrated by that. So there's got to be a way to get away from, to think about the common good. How can we find a way for young families who want to make a decent, a young couple should own their place. It's their place to raise their family. We should find a way to support that. I don't know how. And I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I'm a Catholic. And there's a teaching in the, right? So we got to find a way to do this. Not the government, no ways, but ourselves. So if we support orthodoxy, let's find a way to support our families.
Yeah, and I think something that has kind of been flashing through my mind as we've been talking about this is both my grandparents built their own houses, or at least, bought their own houses fairly young. Yeah. And they had, my dad is one of 9, my mom is one of 14. Right. And those houses are, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. They're not huge. Now, I remember my dad explicitly telling me that his parents, for I don't know how long, probably 10, maybe 15 years, slept in the living room. They didn't have a bedroom. They went to bed after the kids went to bed. Right. They got up before they got up. Right. And it wasn't a problem. Everyone had their own bedroom and bathroom. No one thought of it. Right. But that's not normal in today's standard. Right. You wouldn't sleep in the living room. You find a place and you have it. Depends on money. Maybe you have to make it work. But I also think that maybe part of the problem is how we're framing the problem. Right. Or how we're framing the solution. Right. Is that, I'm thinking, well, I want to be where my parents are right now. Right. But they've been doing this for 25, 30 years. Right. So it's not really fair of me to expect to make enough money to own a house of that size. Right. At the same time, my grandparents raised all of these kids, and I'm sure it was hard. I'm sure it wasn't perfect. Right. But they did fine in a house that's half the size of the place I live in right now with one baby. Right. And that's just I've been blessed, so that's not a discredit to them, and that's not a compliment to me.
No.
But thinking about it, it's like the place that I live is much nicer than my grandparents, where they lived their entire life.
Right.
I have different job opportunities. It's a different culture. It's a different economy.
Right.
But the point being, we shouldn't be, and maybe I should kind of edit what I said a little bit earlier of, you get your home, then you resell it. Well, maybe the solution is you get a home, you build it to your specifications, you have a couple of bedrooms so you can have, accommodations for 10 kids around there. Right. You have property, your neighbors of people that you know, and you could resell. But the only reason you really resell would just to be to move somewhere else. You wouldn't resell because, we're running out of space, we need a bigger place. You'd build a place that would work for your family, and you'd be able to afford it. So you might initially have a house that's a little bit bigger than you need, and then 10 years in, it's a little bit smaller than you need.
Sure.
And that's fine. Because I think that everyone, you think about it, you live in a basement apartment, you get a tiny place, a townhome or something, then you move into a bigger rental, then you buy your first place. But everyone has this idea of moving up and up and up.
Right.
And you don't necessarily need to move up and up. Like, do your kids have beds? Do they have bedrooms?
Yep.
Do the girls and boys have different bathrooms?
Yep.
Okay, you're good.
That's right.
And if you have extra money and you have a bigger place, that's fine.
Yep.
But that shouldn't be the standard. Is we need a bedroom for each child.
Right.
Because you're going to run out of space pretty quickly.
So I think one of the things we can do, kind of on a simple level, you're right on the money, and I'm listening very carefully to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm a real fan of what you're saying. I've never heard this. That's great. I mean, really, really good. On the fundamentals, we can do much more to come alongside the generous families in our parish. There's poor families in our parish who are keeping the faith, promoting the faith, even more brilliantly than the richer families. Okay, who we don't know them as well, but I know a few. I could name some names of families that get the highest respect for the orthodoxy, the tradition that their kids are getting as real, genuine, good people, but they don't have a lot of money. But we can come alongside and support the poor in our midst, in our parish, more. The danger of what's happening here in Front Royal is gentrification. More wealth coming in from Northern Virginia. It becomes a commute for Northern Virginia and D.C., so money it gets higher and higher and higher. And so the kind of people that have come here historically, from far distances for orthodoxy, like my family, and like probably your folks, have come here and made a start here, that's getting harder and harder to do. And I want to come against that culturally. We got to find a way to support the little people doing the right thing. And they don't make a lot of noise, see? The difference between the poor and the little people, and I want to support the little people. Not the trumpeters, right? I'm quite a loud person, but I want to find a way to support the little folks who are really doing it and raising wonderful, wonderful families. Okay? And encouraging more of that, the generosity. That's the gift of Catholic family, is the generosity.
Do you think that the solution to that is primarily the housing crisis? Letting people be able to pay for and buy their own houses? Do you think that that's primarily the solution?
It's got to be on top on the list. It's because it's such an oppressive thing. The rents are unbelievable. Again, rents that are higher than mortgages. How about establishing because I'm an idealist, right? So what about like on It's a Wonderful Life? What about a Catholic,
Building and loan? That's what you're,
Yeah. What about a Jesus, Mary, Joseph building a loan? Now, building a loan's out of favor legally, so credit union. But still, what about a credit base? You're faithful in the church. You've got a record of orthodoxy. It's your house, buddy. You don't need to qualify. You've qualified because you're good people. What about that? What about that?
You make the payments and you fix what goes wrong.
Correct. It's your home. How about that?
Yeah.
What about a radical Catholic idea?
Yeah.
What about radical? Where we're not bound with, we got to fit in. And if you're not fitting in, it's we need to be more supportive of the little faithful people. That's the answer to the whole world's problems, I think.
Yeah.
That's it. It's not just one little place of Front Royal. It's the pattern of what do we do with faithful people? Is supporting the faithful people. And that's the civilization of love that John Paul II is talking about to me. It's how do we support the young families? You're Orthodox, you're strong in the faith. All indications are that you're going to raise a holy, good family. How about we give you support? What can we do to help you? You know, that to me, that's the magnanimity and generosity that we need to generate.
Yeah, and it seems like that would primarily start in families.
Right.
Like if I, I'm building a house or I'm redoing my house, my family is all going to be there to help me.
Exactly.
But not everyone has that,
Right.
and not everyone has a big family to be able to do that. So it's almost like if you don't have that family support, how do we give you a community support that is similar to the way a family would support you? Yeah, you don't need to pay me. Oh,
Well, that's
I brought all my tools. Like
that's what
I'm
pulls
not
us,
charging you.
That's what pulls us toward the Amish model. What if we're not so dependent on insurance? What if we're depending on each other? What about the common? What about holding things in common? I don't have anybody that I'm ready to do that with, but theoretically, that has to be an option for me. That I'm in common with other people. Look at it; it's right in the scriptures. They didn't have their own things. How about that? What about the common good? What about the things that are, what about the common good? And that changes the whole dynamic of what real community is. So success to me is whether or not there's money, whether or not I have great success in gold. I expect I will have great success in gold. But real success is going to be that kind of generous, big thinking. And we can activate that whether or not there's money in our little systems. If we have big ideas, and again, that's what the gift of Catholic manhood is about, is big ideas.
Yeah.
That's what the saints are about, is big. We're beyond ourselves. It's way beyond me, right? How can we help our people?
Yeah.
Like St. John Bosco would say, where it's easy to do good and hard to do wrong, right? That encouragement with each other. Yeah, we have tremendous opportunity here.
Is that what caused you to kind of start the newsletter, the community newsletter?
Exactly. So the newsletter is along those same lines. It's very much that way. And how do we support the new people who've just come? I love seeing somebody who's brand new and introducing myself. And have you heard about the newsletter? So now the newsletter's got almost 1,000 emails.
No kidding.
It's the biggest email list in the parish, which I keep very cloistered.
Yeah.
It's not. I had a politician locally approach me recently. Can I have some emails? I said no. I'm personally committed to not giving the emails because I've been working on building this confidentially for years. We're 14 years in.
But if you want to run an ad,
if you want to run an ad, it's promotion, but it's not my promotion. This is about us. How can we help each other? What can we do to again, the principle is, what are we doing to favor the household of faith? What are we doing to support our people? There's nothing wrong with having a people. It's us. And look at the Mormons. Okay, God bless the Mormons. They're really good with family.
Yeah.
But who's Joseph Smith? But not to rip
the
him
whole
up.
golden plate thing is kind of hard to believe.
It's ridiculous. How can that be defended?
No, I know some Mormons pretty well. They're great people.
They're wonderful people.
The one that I know, she's a fantastic woman, has kids, and every time we talk, which is not often, it's always about Catholicism, because I think Catholicism for them is very much Mormonism for us. We look at Mormonism and we're like, they're pro-family, they have a lot of kids, they follow pretty specific rules, they're pretty disciplined, a lot of them are very successful,
right.
They love community,
right.
But they have this weird thing with Joseph Smith and
it's
whatever.
Weird.
And they look at us and think all the same things and like, they have this weird thing with the Pope and the saints. And I was like, we actually have a lot in common. And if you're actually a LSD, you really believe everything the traditional Mormons believe, we have some disagreements. But a lot of the more modern
they don't know.
Mormons, they actually have separated from that. They don't believe in polygamy. They don't believe in some of these odd things that kind of are the stereotype Mormon beliefs.
Right.
And looking at it, I'm like, no, you actually, everything you're saying is actually just the Beatitudes and the Commandments.
That's right.
But you don't call it that.
Yeah.
And you believe in an afterlife that's different. And there's some
weird stuff.
There's some weird stuff.
Yeah.
But on a day-to-day level, like, you're disciplined and you think you don't drink. And like very Catholic things, you just don't understand that it's Catholic. You're just living a life of reason and virtue to the best of your ability. Right. And 90% of it is like I was explaining to them. I was like, literally, other than contraception and a few things of the papacy, you believe most of the Catholic things.
That's right.
The Eucharist too would be a big one.
They're also correct. They're also ahead of us in some ways that I would challenge us to get caught up on. So Mormons require that every family have a year's worth of food stashed away. Okay.
How do they enforce that?
Well, they do.
It's just kind of
It's a thing.
you do it.
Yeah, I'm told. I'm not a Mormon, so I don't know. I've only heard this.
Okay.
Right? But I've heard that, and I've heard from several places that they have a year's worth of food as a requirement from the bishop, that they stash food. And so I've had the idea of what I'll call the king's larder, where if I was the king, okay, and I think of King Jesus now, right? If I was the king, I would establish hundreds of food pantries and food stashes of permanent food, 25-year food, in your basement, in your basement, in your basement. I'd put it in families, not in some central place that can get ripped off if there's something bad that happens. And so in the king's larder, if you need food personally, if you're falling on hard times, you got hurt, or you can't work or whatever, by all means eat the food. It's for that purpose. If you have plenty, if you're doing fine money-wise and you don't need the food, then use it once in a while and keep replacing it. So there's always 25 years worth of food in your space, in your family's area, and in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
So if there is something that happens, you're able to help your family and your neighbors to keep civilization. The goal is the keeping of civilization and the generosity of the king's larder. So if I could fund it as the king, I'm not the king, but the king would fund it. Yeah. And it would be the king's food. So people wouldn't have to pay for it. So food is not the issue. That's the first thing that goes in some kind of a situation, And there's all kinds of scenarios where we could lose electricity. There's all kinds of ways that could come down. You think of the Carrington effect. Carrington, Lord Carrington? So in 1859, there was a British observer, astronomer, Lord Carrington, looking at sunspots in the British Observatory. And he sees this massive sunspot. And, 12 hours later, it hits the USA and causes fire in all the telegraph stations. And it wiped out the electrical grid. It's called the Carrington event in 1859. If that happened today, we wouldn't have electricity, at least in part of the country.
Well, a lot of people I've heard recently, too, talking about the power grid and how essentially if you were any country that had any modicum of intelligence, you could easily wipe it out.
Of course.
It's not that difficult. Right. It's overpowered.
Correct.
There's too many people on it. We don't have enough backup generator power.
We're very vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable.
But it could be it could be a God thing from Carrington, or it could be an EMP from an enemy. Yeah. There's all kinds of idiocy in between. And God could do a Carrington anytime he wants. Yeah. And wipe out things. So the point is that we've created this artificial scenario so dependent on the power and the computing, but where are we? What happens to our people in any kind of emergency like that? Yeah. Are we prepared to deal with water? That's the primary issue. If you're on electric pumps and your well is 1,000 feet deep, what are you going to do? Do you have ability to filter the river? Can you walk to the river? So that emergency planning, we do that kind of thinking in Knights of Columbus too. The mass terrorism and casualty thinking. We have groups in the parish we've divvied up to take responsibility for the different areas of the parish. And we're not far advanced, but we've done some thinking about it. And that's an important piece too, that we plan. And the food is part of that. But again, not because of I predict prophetically it's going to be this in this days, there's 3 days of darkness, or there's this visionary or that. I'm very skeptical of that stuff. And it could happen that way, I don't know. But from my background in the New Age, right, and the paganism, I'm very skeptical of any specific, my numbers said it's going to be this. I could care less what your numbers say, bud. But are we ready to help each other if there's a time of need? If you go through a hard time, do I have food for you? Yeah. And are we set up for that?
That's something
So the Mormons have that right.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
But we should be more like the Mormons. We should think about the community and be prepared to help each other in very practical ways. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I'm curious. It's interesting you say this, because I think that men a lot of times think along these lines, but don't realize that other people are thinking the same way. And I'm very much, I wouldn't say I'm like an emergency preparedness, I have my bunker ready, but like I'm very much the kind of person who's like, when that ammo comes back in stock, I'm buying more. And, if I can buy bulk of meat, I'll do it and freeze it. And it's not a skeptical or a panic mode.
Right.
It's just no. I mean, you never know when Walmart shuts down. You never know when we get too much snow and we can't get out. You never know when people need food or people come over unexpectedly and we need food. So I'm always thinking that way. But it's not something that I have had to think, oh, what if this scenario happened, therefore I should do X? I just kind of do it. Like, I want food.
But part of why you just do it is because of where you came from. When I happen to know your folks taking on the neighbor recently who didn't have any power, okay, and raising money for the neighbor who was out of power, and we help them with that. But we come from people of generosity. So the Catholic families, you've learned generosity. This is the great gift of Catholic family. And the gift of great numbers of kids. You learn generosity as part of the culture. John Paul II was articulate with this. Evangelium Vitae. Remember that encyclical? It's one of my favorites. I realized that's why I converted to the church in retrospect, is Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, 1995. Read this. I love that encyclical. Yeah. It gives me such hope still today. The Gospel of Life. Culture of death. Civilization of love. Those are big, big themes of my soul, planted by Holy Father. But you're generous, like you think like that because you were raised that way. I greatly rejoice in that. Right. It's great. I think that, and that's the gift. We've received this gift with each other to be like that together. We need to be more like the Mormons. We need to be really, really in a position to really help each other with no questions asked.
How would you advise someone? I've kind of noticed this in some of my friend groups, and I'm not, calling out anyone specifically. It's a different way of being raised. It's being at the younger end versus at the older end. It's being a middle child. Like there's all these different factors as to how you live, how you treat people. Right? There's lots of different factors. But something I have noticed is that, and this is an extremely general stereotype, but kids who are either the oldest or close to the middle tend to be much more forward-thinking, proactive, not afraid of taking care of children, kind of thinking about providing a lot. And people who are on the younger end tend to be less so. And they're better at other things that I'm not good at. But like being on the older end, I tend to think very much like, who needs to go where? What time is this happening? Who needs help with dinner? Like kind of practical things. And I'm sure that that's just half of the pie, and the other half of the pie I'm terrible at. But a lot of my friends tend to be on the younger end. And so there's not really a concept of we're hosting, we need to buy food. And to me, that's just like, it's natural. Like people are coming over, get the wine out from the pantry. Like that's what you do. There's kind of that hospitality. Sure. And it's never a second thought. I don't know how much the wine costs. I don't care. People are here, they get to drink it. That's the rule. And if I don't want to share it, then I shouldn't buy it. That's right. And that's just kind of always been like, no, it's just what you do. But and this isn't even towards my friends specifically, there's a large contingent of people that don't think that way. Right. You come over, maybe they offer you some water, but they don't really kind of like pull out the stops. There's not this hospitality. There's not this. And I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that. And like, how do you cultivate that? How do you kind of, how do you cultivate that in other people? Like you can't make other people generous, but I think people want to do that. Maybe they don't have good examples. I don't know what it is, but it seems like there's this gap of like, that's not. Yeah. I was even talking to my wife about this today. She said that she was impressed. She was on flight, and she was impressed with how professional the stewardess was. And I said, that's great, but you shouldn't be impressed. The only thing that should happen was, the actual scenario that should leave an impression is, oh, they were rude. But typically, it should be, no, they were very helpful, very nice, very polite, gave me the water, put a lid on it, because that's their job. Right. And I expect professionalism, and I'm going to treat you with respect. Awesome. But there's a total loss of that, which I think is why you see the kind of, there's a phrase for it, but kind of the Chick-fil-A mentality of, and it's like, oh my gosh, they're so successful. They're just good at customer service that every place was up until recently, and now you hire these people that just need a minimum wage job, and so they don't care, but they're thriving and they're doing incredibly well because they have team bonding. They hire good people. They try to hire Christian people. They're all polite. They all look nice. They all look professional, and they take care of you like you should. I'm paying for food. You should take care of me.
100%. That's beautiful.
But yeah, how would you encourage that in kind of a Catholic community that needs that, but doesn't necessarily have that?
Well, I think you're right on the money. You named a bunch of the key points. But I think the beginning is, the generosity of the families, is following that leadership in our community is, I think of some of the families, including your family, but many others in this parish who've been foundation families that
Front
are generous.
royalty, yeah.
The front royalty, but the local people who are generous by the nature of the family. And you're right that the older in the family, there's more forward thinking. I recognize I'm the oldest, so I get it. But I think it's following the lead of the generosity. And I see these families embedded in these other families here. There's been some intermarriage in the community, not all, but a great gift of some of these families. I don't want to name names again. It's just too much. I've named your family's name, but that's because we're here. But there's a tremendous gift. So I think it's just celebrating that and then being that way and holding the standards high, of course. And you're right on the money with it. And so it's the modeling. This is possible. So the dignity and the respect and the,
And I think the key with all of that is that it's the fathers that need to lead that.
It is. Absolutely.
I mean, it's the same. It makes sense. It's the same thing with, kids who are raised with a father who's practicing are like somewhere in the 90th percentile to staying Catholic, and people that don't have a father who's Catholic, or he's involved but not Catholic, or not involved, it's half that.
Right.
It's just, that's statistically true just with the faith. So you think about anything else.
Yeah.
You think about really any other type of virtue that's inculcated in these kids. If the father's not the one leading and creating that model and creating that, demanding that respect and creating that model and creating this path, well, no wonder. No wonder.
That's right.
That's the whole crisis of fatherhood that we're seeing now.
It is. And I think the way to attack that, we have a men's program at the parish. You probably heard of That Man Is You. Well, I helped start the group that's here. I'm very, very happy to be. This is my band of brothers. This is my identity. Even when I'm far away, the gold mining unfortunately takes me far away. But, even when I'm far away, I have this band of brothers that are supporting me. And so That Man Is You comes from the scripture. Do you know that's recognize that? So King David thought he was so successful in seducing Bathsheba. Okay? He thought he got away with this. And then God sends Nathan to visit King David, the prophet. So Nathan comes to David and he says, King David, there was a king who owned all the sheep in the area, had everything. And there was one poor man with a beautiful sheep, but he only had one. And the rich king stole the poor man's sheep. What should happen to the rich king? And King David said, oh, that king should be killed. And Nathan says to King David, that man is you. That man is you. You're the one that thought you hid from God in seducing Bathsheba and then having your husband sent to the front of the battle and killed. You are that man. And that caused David's repentance. Thank God. Although my sins be like scarlet, be washed and they'll be whiter than snow. So David made repentance. Okay. And here we are in Lent. It's time to repent of our sins. Okay. We have all sinned, all fallen short. And so, but our program's all about that. Is that personal accountability. That man is me. I have sinned. And so then holding each other, building the relationships between men and holding each other to account. It's a great program. 6:30 every morning, every Saturday morning at church. It's great. We've attracted mostly older men. Thank God we're getting a whole batch of young guys in. But a young Catholic father should be part of that, even if they're not from a big family, to learn that same generosity, because we talk about the same things. Yeah. It's a lot of the presentation. So it's a big men's breakfast, and then it's a video presentation challenging about these very issues we're talking about, and then we break into small groups, and then we go to morning mass. It's great. It's an absolute fantastic way to, if you're not raised in a big Catholic family like you were, then you can learn the generosity by associating with the philosophy of Catholic culture vitality. There's tremendous potential here. Because I wasn't raised in a Catholic family. I was raised in a very selfish family, but I've chosen this by God's grace. I've been influenced, and I've chosen Jesus. I've chosen the way of the family. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
Couldn't be happier.
So what are the things that get you up in the morning? We've talked about the gold mining. We've talked about the Catholic community. You've got the newsletter.
Right.
What are some of the other things that really motivate you to, I guess, like, it sounds cliche, but, you know, kind of to fight the good fight, or to kind of keep at it? Like, what are some of the things in your life that you're passionate about? I know you do the beeswax candles. I don't know if that's just kind of a side thing that you enjoy, or if that's a kind of a passion project. But
it's a passion project, but it's a way to relax. The beeswax and other hobbies and crafts are a way to bring in the artistic and unwind. That's another gift from Berkeley, right? Okay.
Yeah, tell me about some of those. Like,
I will, but I want to mention first that to get me up in the morning, I have a wonderful wife. Okay, we love each other almost 36 years. I made the best choice in my life to choose Deanna, right? And so being married and being in the sacrament, again, and being able to go to Mass with her, and then we pray the rosary every night together. I mean, I have this wonderful Catholic life that gets me up. I'm really excited about our faith. And of course, this kind of thing is just wonderful. Mm-hmm. But I also need to, because I've got a very kind of wound up personality, I need to relax. I need to consciously choose to do things to unwind, right? This is relaxing for me. I'm enjoying the long format, the little bit of drink, and I'm enjoying this very much. But the beeswax candles I enjoy for creating something in the dark of winter that smells so good and brings light. So I love candles. I make them. I make some money, but I mostly do it for me. I'm sniffing when the wax is liquid. I'm sniffing the wax and then pouring the candle. And then I'll sniff the beeswax and then pour the candle. So I do it as it's good for me to relax. Mm. Remember, there's light in the dark time of year. Mm. I'm a victim of, not a victim, but I'm susceptible to seasonal affective disorder. Mm. Right, when it gets darker, I kind of get a little gloomy. Yeah. So it helps me to kind of remember these are good, you know. Mm. But I do all kinds of creative things and that's the Berkeley connection, because I was raised in creativity. So people are kind of down on Berkeley because it's kind of the center of a lot of the goofiness that we associate. But I would say there's some really good things about where I was raised. And so one of the things would be what I'll call the human potential movement. Okay, I want you to become the best Anthony for you to be. I want to do everything I can to support you to be the best person you can be. I want to be the best Michael I can be, what God wants me to be. And if I can come alongside other people and help them, and I'll say that I want the best for them is the human potential thing from Berkeley. There's possibility for you to do more than you think you can do. Let's get out of the box, man. And I'm not talking about the drugs. Thank God I didn't get sucked completely into drugs, right? I'm not talking about drugs. I'm not talking about the sex orgies and all that kind of stuff that depreciates Berkeley. I'm talking about the creativity.
Kind of that creative spark.
Yeah. And again, the human potential concepts. I'm very much there as a positive of Berkeley. So again, some negative things, but the positive was, and I'm not a hippie, but I was associated. I was close to the hippie movement, and a positive from the hippie movement was you can do more with yourself. Let's do this. Mm-hmm. But let's take that in the Catholic context. Let's do this for God. What does God want? Let's free each other up to do more for Jesus. What can we do? Let's help each other. And then we have to think that is at the core then, and the money has to fall into place associated with that. So if there's ministries, if someone has something that God's telling them to do, let's find a way to support them. Mm. What does God want for you? Right? Mm. And then we become missionary and ministry, and then God served. So the Quakers, for example, this is kind of my inspiration from my historical background. The Quakers had a religious principle against owning slaves. So they're the first religious group in the country that preached against the owning of slavery. So a guy like John Woolman up in New Jersey was a Quaker, a friend, who in preaching by foot, he walked down to the Deep South and preached against slavery, that the slaves are human beings, that there's that of God in the slave and in the Indians. The Quakers were known to be the only religious group that kept their treaties with the Indians and didn't hold slaves. Those are, today they're kind of, that should be normal, but it wasn't. In the day, Catholics, unfortunately, weren't good with this, historically, politically. You know, Catholics, even though the church teaches against slavery, Catholics here in the country had slaves. So it's a hard, it's a hard situation, right? But the concepts that there's that of God in every person. This is very much the bridge for me between the Quaker beginning and the Catholic. I'm very much a believer that there's innate goodness in every person. There's original goodness, and the church teaches this. Mm-hmm. It doesn't teach utter evil like the Protestants do. Mm-hmm. I'm by all means not a Calvinist. Okay?
Yeah.
I can't stand it. There's utter evil in people, and, we're just covering a dung, all that kind of stuff. It doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. There's goodness, that we've sinned, we've fallen away from Christ, but it's possible to come back and live a virtuous life, to become holy. I don't think it's possible here to be fully perfect. And therefore, I don't think the reality is I'm never going to be fully happy in the Valley of Tears. This is where I yearn for heaven. Mm. This is the messianism comes to full fruit. I recognize I'm never going to be fully happy here, but I'll be as happy as I can be, and serve God. And the family life is the core of that. The community is the core of that. But I can't wait to get to heaven. I'm obviously not ready, but I can't wait, because then imagine no more questions. I question everything. I worry about everything. Mm-hmm. Imagine no more questions. Yeah. Wow, forever? So I'm very much drawn. And so my heart, I realize that all my activity, all my actions, because I'm hungry for heaven. I want beatitude. And since we're going to get to know each other forever there, why don't we start now?
Yeah.
Let's get it together, folks. Let's do stuff together, because we're going to end up doing it together forever anyway. Why not get started now?
Yeah.
That kind of drops the thing of why I shouldn't do that I shouldn't do the community work together. Why should I cooperate? Well, hey, we're going to have to do it forever anyway, so let's do it. Mm. So that's kind of at the core for me. So in that comes manly courage to step out and try to do things little by little. I have to be patient. I have to be very patient, Yeah. And so I'm learning patience.
Yeah, it seems like there's a fairly large contingent of men that have had families, and either all their kids are moved out, or maybe they have some grandkids, or their youngest is not a baby anymore, and so they're kind of thinking about the next steps. And I'm obviously not at that stage, but I do like talking to them to try to figure out, well, what can I do? Like, if I can start getting involved now, I'll do it. And if not, then I want to be thinking about what does 10 years, 15 years from now look like. Right. And one thing that has really been on my mind for a long time, primarily because of you, and I know my dad was involved with this, is like the Catholic graveyard, Catholic burial grounds. And that's something that I don't know why I never thought about it before, or why I thought it was normal that St. John's didn't have one. But that's not particularly normal, to have a huge Catholic community and not have anywhere to bury people. Right. There's places to get buried, but why don't we have like a 50-acre lot somewhere that has nice stone walls and a nice entrance and some staff that works there, and they work with the families? And also, why don't we have a Catholic funeral home that can build things that are in accordance with the zoning and everything, but don't cost $50,000 to get a casket?
Exactly.
Why are we doing this?
Right.
Why? And also, why is it a huge problem to have a friend of yours? I know Strong Oaks has done this a few times, but why is it a problem to have them build a coffin? I would much rather be buried in a hand-built, and then if you have to put it into the big concrete thing for the code. For code, then fine. But why do you have to get this really high-end whatever so that the funeral home is making money? And I get they need to make money, it's a business, but why isn't there a Catholic infrastructure? Because every weekend you hear at the announcements of someone else that passed away.
100%.
So why don't we have a graveyard? Why don't we have why don't we have someone that's a stonemason that can make these tombstones? Like, why aren't people stepping up and doing this? And I don't know what my involvement will be in that, but I think that's a really worthwhile pursuit, because everyone needs it.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to deal with when you're grieving the loss of a loved one, your father, your mother, your spouse, your child, God forbid, is a $20,000
Correct.
expense. No
Right.
one wants to, like that's
Right,
ridiculous.
right.
They just need to be buried.
100%. I'm a big fan. I completely agree.
Yeah, I don't know. It just crossed my. And I know you were involved with some of the initial talks on that. But
we talked about it. We formed a committee. Your dad and I and some others. Fundamentally, it didn't succeed because it costs an awful lot of money. You got to come up with huge retained costs for these things. It's still a viable concept. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
it should be. It really should be. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, and everybody's getting buried up at Happy Creek largely.
Right.
So by de facto, that's becoming the Catholic cemetery.
Yeah.
But we're still missing the boat on that.
Is that something that the diocese would potentially fund?
But do we want the diocese to run our business? See, I've always been an advocate of, again, distant authority, we should do it ourselves. And maybe the diocese could fund it, but then there's, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested in what Father Guy would think about it, because I know that they're buying land and trying to build a new church, so that's probably the primary goal.
No, they bought the land, 7 acres.
Okay, that's already been done.
Yeah.
But I wonder if a secondary goal would be, let's get the church done, and then we're going to start a $10 million fund over the next couple of years, and we're going to have fundraising dinners and whatever we need to do.
Sure.
But we're going to raise this money, and we're going to build a Catholic cemetery, and if you're part of the St. John's, your plots are X%, and by being a parishioner, you get a plot maybe. There's some type of buy-in program. There has to be a way to do that, because I think it's absolutely absurd that, I saw this with both of my grandparents when they were buried. They weren't buried in maybe it was a Catholic cemetery, but it wasn't super close to the church.
Right.
They had lots next to their spouse, but that was about it. It doesn't, it's just, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't, I want to walk around and see all the crosses and all the flowers.
That's right.
And it to be part of the church.
I agree,
why would it
100%.
not be part of the church? Why is this separate?
You're right. You're right on the money. I agree.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
It's all part of that forward thinking we were talking about.
Sure.
We know, what is that?
Sure.
What does the community need, and how can people step up and provide an opportunity?
Right. And how can we make an even safer place for? I want to address a harder issue, just because I think we have to.
Yeah.
There's also vulnerability, and there's brokenness, and there's sin that's affected our community. Okay. There's abuse in our midst. There's been problems. And there's been some suicides that are awfully close to home. Okay.
Yeah.
And that would lead me to the topic of Catholic psychotherapy. And so I think we need to be big proponents of supporting, the Divine Mercy University and growing these apostolates so that anybody who's in trouble, who's vulnerable in our community, has ability to get help, without money. It can't be a money thing.
Yeah.
There's a dear friend of ours whose daughter just committed suicide. And unfortunately, the psychotherapy was desired, but the cash wasn't there, and it didn't happen. And it bugs me. It really bothers me. It's on my conscience. I could have done more.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So we stood around the grave saying goodbye to her, and a young girl. And we knew her well. We knew the family. We know the families well, and it's just hard.
Yeah.
And yet she despaired. She had crisis of her faith. I understand why from behind the scenes. I know why, but there's too much young people who despair and don't have ability to access to good help.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't mean everybody gets saved.
Yeah.
I've got to say that Father Guy is extraordinarily good at helping families in crisis. He's got my complete loyalty because he's both helped us, and I've known him help other people. He's incredible. He's incredible. He's in ministry, incredible. Father Tom's incredible. Father Guy in particular is very, very good with stepping in, but people don't know necessarily to come get some help.
Yeah.
Okay, and so it's got to be wide permissions, and get rid of the stereotypes of trouble. There's trouble. Not everybody has even in great Catholic families, there's still mental problems.
Yeah.
It doesn't mitigate against the Valley of Tears. We're in the Valley of Tears, man.
Yeah, and I wonder if a way to set it up would be to have, you'd almost have to have a couple of staff members who can vet people, who can say, hey, you do need help.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. You're already part of the program you're in. And then that person's job would be to approach benefactors and say, hey, we have this young woman or young man, this is what they're struggling with, this is our financial situation, we're asking for a pledge of X dollars to get them through, and then we're going to let them know that you're the donor, and they're going to be in contact with you. Maybe if you want that, maybe it's totally anonymous. But you have something like that where people can, because I think that's a big thing with donors, and I know for a fact at Christendom, it's way more successful to come to a person and say, we have this student, this is their name, this is where they're from, they want a Catholic education, here's how much it's going to cost, would you be willing to donate or pay for their school? Versus, we have an endowment fund that we'd like you to chip in some money for. Some people will do that, but you need that personal plea for help, and people
it's too much. It's got to be extreme confidence. I'm not mentioning names. It's got to be right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. You can't, with the mental health issues, it's got to be very, very careful. Yeah. Names aren't talked about. It cannot be that model of. Okay. Absolutely can't be. No, it's extremely private, extremely close to home, and there's problems in the parish. You think of the marriage problems that we know about. Sure. And here we are. I'm very much an advocate against annulments. Okay, but the predecessor for that is proper marriage formation. We should be, as a church, saying no to some people who aren't ready to get married. Yeah. Well,
and you see that in the marriage prep programs. I almost wrote, when we went to do our marriage prep with the diocese, I almost wrote on there, and I wrote some criticisms of the program, and I almost wrote, please contact me. I'd be happy to lead this next year. Yeah. Now, I don't know if I would be a good leader. I don't know if I would do well.
Do something better.
But I think I could do better. And that's a low bar. But hey, it's some sort of progress. We were sitting at a table, and there was a couple with us, and one of them weren't Catholic. I believe the man wasn't Catholic. Okay, fine. He's going through RCIA, he's doing the marriage programs, doing all the right things. And one of the speakers said something like, hey, if you don't know if the person you're marrying has ever had a previous spouse, or if they have significant credit card debt, that should be something you should talk about. And I could see the guy getting uncomfortable, and I could hear them talking later. He's like, yeah, I do have a lot of credit card debt. I didn't think that'd be a big deal. Well, I have a job, we'll pay it off. And I was like, how did you get to the diocesan marriage prep program and not tell her? No, I don't know if it was killer debt, or if he's just feeling guilty about $1,000 or something. Right. But it just kind of struck me as, if that's something people aren't thinking about, and money is the number one cause for divorce or annulment. So that is a big deal. Right. It is. But I think another thing, and this is Deacon Yergi and I talked about this a little bit. Yeah, I think it was after the podcast, but he mentioned that he's been involved in some ministry with the whole pornography epidemic. And that may be, particularly in Catholic circles, that may be more of a factor, or at least equally a factor to financial struggle. Because if you found out there was a problem before the marriage, okay, now you have grounds for annulment. If you find out there's a problem during the marriage, then what do you do? And then how do you support your husband who's struggling with this? And who does your husband talk to in confidence, and accountability and all this stuff? And yeah, it's a real problem. But I think there's a lot of people involved in it, and they're in that deep, and they don't know what to do. They know it's a sin. They know they go to confession, but they don't know how to deal with the problem, because admitting that you have a problem might mean your marriage is over. So that's different than saying, oh, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm addicted to video games. This is a whole different section. Yep. And I think that's something that I think a lot of men really locally need to, I know they are kind of in confidence stepping up and helping, but more openly need to be like, hey, this is a serious problem. Correct. This is killing marriages. This is killing relationships. Yep. This is part of the reason why you have a bunch of single guys that aren't dating. This is the problem, or at least one of the main problems. Agreed. And we need to stop being pansies about it. Correct. It's an issue. People struggle with it. People are exposed at a young age. Why are we acting like this is a private sin? It's not. Get it out in the open. Yep. Figure it out. Get an accountability partner. Yep. Throw your phone away. Right on. Get a phone block. Whatever you need to do, and then move on. Yeah. You can't swim with an anchor. You just can't.
You're right on the money. And it's one of the things we deal with very intimately at That Man Is You. Some of my brothers who have had problems with pornography, they bring it out in a small group, and there's been some real changes. I've seen marriages saved by some work. I've seen the break of the marriage. I've seen it, sacrament of marriage, come back together by God's grace. Yeah. And a lot of work and a lot of forgiveness. But there was a fellow who came to a small group at That Man Is You, and confessed that he was preparing to divorce his sacramental marriage wife. He prepared the papers. Wow. And a dear brother of mine confronted him during the small group about this. And he talked him out of it. And now the marriage is not thriving, but they're still together. They're still having some trouble. But we followed that. Very intimate confessions of these things are possible, but you have to create the context for this.
Yeah.
You have to kind of encourage men to come together.
Yeah.
And so there are ways to address these things, but it's not just you can't talk about things at mass.
Yeah.
So I think one of the challenges of St. John's is there's very little opportunity to get to know each other. I'd say we barely know each other in this community. So I think every opportunity where men, women, families, men in particular, can get together and get to know each other and build friendships, every single opportunity is God working to build stronger.
Yeah, and that's something that I've realized kind of as the podcast has been developing is that's kind of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I don't know how much good it's doing for other people, but it does a lot of good for me because there is very rarely a scenario, and I'm sure this is the case for you, where you get to sit down with someone who maybe you're really good friends or maybe you don't know them very much at all, but you sit down for 3 hours, there's no interruptions, you're not looking at your phone, no one's calling you, there's nowhere to go, and it's a sacrifice. My wife wishes I was at home right now, I'm sure, and I'm sure yours is the same way, but you think about, no, I spent, and it's odd because 50 years ago, maybe not even that long ago, that was not an issue.
Right.
But the fact that I can look at my week and say, yeah, really the only night where I'm not watching TV, where I'm not on my phone, where I'm not kind of distracted, where I'm actually very dialed in and I'm just talking to a person about what they're interested in and what we're mutually interested in.
Yeah.
That's a rare scenario. And I think it's a really cool thing. It seems silly that you have to come to a studio and plug in equipment and talk. But realistically, I would not invite myself over to your house and talk for 2 hours. And you wouldn't invite me over to do that because you'd feel like, oh, there's an agenda. We need to, it's a business thing.
Right.
So if I kind of take the step of vulnerability and say, I just want to talk to you and you're gracious enough to agree, then you have this interesting scenario of, I get to talk to you for 2 or 3 hours.
That's great.
And it's really odd, but I do really enjoy it. And I think
thanks for doing it, man.
Well, yeah, no, it's my
fantastic.
pleasure.
Yeah, it's great.
But I think that this is a step. It's not the solution, but it's a step to invite other people into a conversation like this, but also to encourage them to start their own thing or to say, hey, like, you should really think about if you've been feeling lonely, if you've been struggling with sin, if you've been whatever, the solution is probably primarily prayer. That's usually the number one recommendation. But a big thing that I've seen is you just need to not think about yourself. And humility, a great quote, one of my favorite quotes is, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking about yourself less. So it's not that you think you're a bad person and you have that Catholic guilt that you don't have, but
I got other guilt.
Quaker guilt, which is totally different.
That's right.
But you actually get outside yourself, and that's why if you're dealing with people who are suicidal or depressed, one of the number one solutions is you should go volunteer at a soup kitchen. You should go help a poor person. You should realize that your life isn't as bad as their lives, and you can actually be instrumental. Another step in that, I think, is just hanging out with good guys. Yeah, and good people. Doesn't need to just be guys, but it can be really refreshing. And I'm sure you see this with the Knights of Columbus meetings with That Man Is You. Just to get together with a bunch of guys and be like, okay, we're actually all in the trenches. It's not just me. Everyone's struggling. Everyone's having a hard time. Yeah. We're all being intentional about this, and it's going to be okay. Yeah. And I also have that kind of brotherhood.
Yeah, that's absolutely, 100%. And the dynamic changes when it's a mixed group. There's always competition. So, absolutely, 100% for men. Right on, man. No, it is the band of brothers. And of course, and then it's not spending, for me, it's a big commitment. I love the commitment of Billy Graham to not spend time alone with a woman that's not your wife.
Yeah.
It's hard in career to not, but it's very important. So I'm working as a carpenter in a parishioner's house, close to the family. And the mom says to me, let's pray together, Michael. And I said, no, I don't want to pray with you. So, why not? So I got away, but then later came back and told her, look, you need to pray with your husband, not me. right? So it's quite important to learn these things.
Yeah.
So I really, as a man, I do not want to spend time alone with anybody who's not my wife. That doesn't mean I'm not have friends, but to go off to dinner with somebody or to have intimate talks or to pray with a woman who's not Deanna, no ways.
No thanks.
No thanks.
Yeah, I remember.
But to learn those things.
Yeah,
See,
I
to have
remember
that
Vice
code.
President Pence was criticized a couple times for not doing that, and I was like,
Go, man. Go, buddy.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Like, why would you possibly, especially at your status, step into a potential harassment scenario?
Correct.
Like, if nothing else for litigation, you shouldn't do it.
Correct. But
which is a sad reason.
See, that's the code of ethics that we have, that we build that positive culture, the things that we've learned from troubles, right? And that defends against the whole, because I get seduced by prayer. I get pulled into somebody else's world. And that's not a world that I want. I'm vulnerable in prayer, right? So it's not a world to be pulled. I get seduced through emotional connection. And so that it belongs in my sacrament. It doesn't belong with other women.
Yeah.
So, it belongs with the family.
Yourself.
Yeah. So we have to get the hedge around our marriages and understand and talk about these things. So this is how we defend marriage.
Yeah.
Is by understanding that there's trouble that comes when you go, well, it's fine, I'm just praying with them. It's not fine. You're praying in a group with whoever you want. But to intimately pray with anybody you're not committed to, no. Yeah. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No. And so Billy Graham, the Protestant, of course, was the one who really promoted that to my consciousness. And he's right on the money. And so Pence picks that up from that culture.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely right on the money. Now with men, it's a different issue. We're going to, we fellowship together. And we belong together. We do need each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask your opinion about something. This is something I heard recently, and I'm not really sure what I think about it, but I think that men primarily, you bond by activity.
Okay.
Right? That's just generally you bond by activity.
Absolutely.
If you're just getting together and there's nothing going on, most of the guys are going to be standing around saying, what's going on? What are we doing? Is there a game happening? Is there a competition? Is there something?
Activity.
What's the program?
Correct. Right.
Another way that men bond is through humor. And a lot of that's just making making fun of people. Because men receive compliments through how much you're criticized if it's done in an obviously loving manner.
Correct.
Right?
That's true.
You're so ugly. Good thing I'm not going to be as bad as you.
Yeah.
I wish I had as much humility as you, and that type of thing, right? But something I was thinking about is there's a priest who was giving a talk on humor, and he was saying that something that men struggle with a lot is sarcasm. And he was saying that sarcasm has a very unique place in life, and there's a time and a place for it, but men tend to broaden that to almost everything, where everything's sarcastic and everything is kind of, and you kind of build up this facade of being funny, but you're never really real. And I was curious just if you've seen that in men, kind of I don't want to be vulnerable, I don't want to say what I think, I'll be sarcastic, but then you kind of start to become cynical. And then you don't really understand how to actually say, no, that actually hurt me. That wasn't a good thing. Or I think you're wrong here, because everything is a passive aggressive, sarcastic comment.
Right.
And I'm just curious if you've battled with that, or if you've observed that as being an issue.
Oh, of course. I mean, you're right on the money. That's very much the issue for men, of course. And yet the beginning of friendships is the banter with men. It's a very healthy banter.
Yeah.
And your dad and I have this great ongoing banter with each other. And we'll develop that, right?
Yeah.
So every man you have to loosen it up a little bit. And I learned that from my dad. The modeling of our fathers, and you learn the style of cultural interaction. You have to have a banter. And that involves some sarcasm. And not the tearing down necessarily, but, but it goes deeper. It gets fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it just a matter of when to cut that out? Like,
there's times to
that's
really,
kind of the first step, but then it should go further.
And then you have to cut it loose, and then you begin to share with each other, begin to trust each other. And building friendships is a big goal. It's hard.
Yeah.
And then, if you don't have friends, when trouble comes, and oh, by the way, trouble will come. There's going to be trouble coming. If you don't know who to call when trouble comes, it's hard. I mean, I've had trouble visit, and then who do you call? So you need to establish very clearly, this is who I call when the shit hits the fan. And it's awfully embarrassing to call when there's trouble, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
You know, but that's the friendship that need to be built.
Yeah.
And who can you call?
Yeah.
It's going to come. And so it's building up the rainy day fund, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
So
we had I had Mr. Mike Brown on, and him and Dr. Cutterback are really close friends. They've been friends since college. And he said that I forget what I asked him, but at some point in the conversation, he was praising Dr. Cutterback, and he was saying, "Oh, I would never say this to John, but he's my best friend and he's great and all this stuff." And so I kind of pushed him on that, and I was asking, okay, what does that mean? And he said, I don't know how to describe it to you, but he is the kind of person, because he's my friend, but in the context of being my friend, he is the person that I would want at my funeral comforting my family. And I was like, that is the weirdest standard for friendship I have ever heard. But yeah, of course, like you want to be the person that is like, I'm going to go to my best friend's funeral and I'm not going to be there losing it, needing to be comforted. I'm going to be the pillar the family can lean on, because they know how much he meant to me, but I can still be the strong person in that scenario. And I was like, wow, that just totally radicalized the way that I'm thinking about my friends. Not in a bad way, but just like that's the standard. You want to be friends with people who could go to your funeral and then and be the pillar for your wife or for your family.
Absolutely.
That stuck with me. It's a really interesting way to think about your friends.
Absolutely. And then there's also, it goes to the communion of saints. And I want to mention Dr. Bernard Pegas. Do you remember Dr. Pegas?
Yeah.
So he was a dear friend.
Yeah, may he rest in peace.
May he rest in peace. So we built a very close friendship. Right when he died, we're in the middle of an email dialogue about how to bring more economic opportunities here. We're in the middle of this whole, and developing that and talking about that, a long-standing, right in the middle of this. And then he got COVID. I had heart surgery right at the same time. So we're, I had heart problems, and he's still a physician. So I coded blue in the emergency room, and Dr. Pegas saw that I coded blue from upstairs and came down. So I didn't even know what happened. I had this heart attack, and I'm in the emergency room, didn't know. And I came to I woke back up. They brought me back, right? Which is the medical miracle. I'd be dead otherwise. But they used the shocks, and brought me back.
The panels, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't know, but I woke back up. Deanna's missing. She's gone. So I said to the doctors right in front of me, I'm confused. I said, where's Deanna? Where's my wife? She said, oh, she stepped out. Turns out she got escorted out because she was, everybody in the hospital room learned the name of Jesus when I fainted, but then they escorted her out. And she's in the waiting room just freaking, am I dead? Am I alive? Right? But then beyond the hubbub of all the doctors and nurses and all the business, there's Dr. Pegas. He just shows up like an angel. Mm-hmm. Okay, and he's kind of beyond all the hubbub. There he is, my friend. And then he comes up to me, and I said, Bernard, where's Deanna? So she's in the waiting room. Can you bring her? So he went and got Deanna. Okay, he'll always be my medical intercessor. He spotted our son's cancer years and years ago. We had an older woman living with us, and he figured out some rare diseases for her. So he's just this intimate part of our family. And helped me with stuff. I mean, really, just a tremendous, brilliant physician. So later I had heart surgery, and I'm recovering in one ICU. And he's in the other ICU dying from COVID. We're in the same hospital. Melanie came and visited me. She's not supposed to, but she came and visited me in the ICU during COVID, right? And so he dies, and I live. But here's my friend. I just want to celebrate him as a friend. He's just, but again, so the friendship is not just... It's the communion of saints too. I'm interceding with Dr. Pegas by talking about him and sharing this little story, but I'm lifted by his brilliance as a physician and his courage in standing for our rights as Catholics in the medical environment. He did some amazing things of his testimonies during the whole COVID time, and so I celebrate that, and that's celebrating my friend.
Yeah.
So I rejoice in him, see, because I believe he's gained beatitude. I mean, God knows. But he certainly did good for us, and he certainly was a really good friend for me. So I'm at the age, I guess, where some of my close friends are now gone. Mm-hmm. And so, but again, that's kind of the glimpse into hereafter, too. You're young enough, your friends haven't died yet. I've had some friends who've died. but they're still my friends.
Yeah.
So there's communion. See.
Right.
Yeah. That's friendship is go beyond the grave too.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course. Friendship.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a great quote that friendship is one of the few gifts that's a remnant of paradise. I think it's I forget where that quote is from, but I'll remember probably in a second. Von Hildebrand.
Alice?
Not Alice, but her husband.
Oh, okay.
Dietrich von Hildebrand?
Yeah.
That's a quote from him. That friendship is one of the remnants, from the fall. That's still, it's a gift of heaven. It's a gift of beatitude. So we should build more friendships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if you read Aristotle, you read his Nicomachean Ethics, and you start thinking about friendships, at least I did this, I think a lot of people do, you start thinking about friendships in the context that he lays them out, where you've got friendships of pleasure, they're just people that are funny, you get together with them sometimes, you're friends, but, if they moved away, wouldn't break your heart. Then you have people of utility, kind of the same thing, they're helpful, they're talented at a skill, you bring them over to bartend your cocktail party or something, but, again, if they moved from town, you wouldn't be that sad. Then you have your true friends. And I think that there's always been this thought in the Catholic community specifically, and I'm not saying that it's untrue, but that everyone needs to just focus on who their true friends are and not waste time with these other people. And I think that's totally false. Okay. That's not to say that you need to spend all of your time constantly catching up with these people, corresponding with these people. But I do think, and it always makes me think of It's a Wonderful Life at the end. There's all these people he interacted with. How many of them would he have considered true friends? A couple, a handful, right? Not many. But there were people in the town that knew him, that knew he was a good person, that came to help. So do you really want to spend your entire life interacting with 3 or 4 people who are your close friends? Yeah, primarily, yes. But that doesn't mean that the person at the coffee shop that you see all the time, the person at the parish you see all the time, whatever, that doesn't mean that they don't exist, and just because they aren't a close friend doesn't mean you can't reach out to them, because they'll remember that. And I think that that's a really important thing for men especially. I think we have this really unique capacity to be able to reach out to people, and I've just started doing this. There's a famous Christian song, and I've referenced it a few times, and I really need to remember what the name of it is. I think the guy's name is Matt. Anyway, it's something about the call. And then the whole song is about, he thought about this friend he hasn't thought of in a long time. He calls him and ends up stopping him from committing suicide. Wow. Doesn't realize it, but that's what he... Wow. And I've kind of transposed that into the Holy Spirit. If you think of someone, It's the Holy Spirit poking you, saying, you should text this person, you should call this person. It doesn't take that much effort. Right. You never know. Right. Worst case scenario, they don't respond. Right. But just the idea of no, I do have an impact on people's lives. And if I have a little bit of extra time to call my cousin who I haven't talked to in a while, send a text to someone, I'll probably text my dad after this and be like, oh, hey, I talked to Mr. Turner and you were brought up. Just a little, I'm still here. I'm still talking to you. Yeah. Because when you lose that, you lose communication, people get lonely, and things go down the drain. So I would go beyond, you're right on the money. Yeah. Yes and. Good. Okay. Yeah. But the next part of it is that it's not just the rescue situations or the extreme situations. Mm-hmm. It's also building this fabric of orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. The Holy Spirit's moving to weave a tremendous thing among us. So if I hear, if I think of somebody, it may be on a whole nother level. It may be that they're in a dire emergency. Sure. But there may be some reason why the Holy Spirit's motioned me. There's a movement of the Spirit to reach out in a certain direction. And so it's the weaving of Christ. Be attentive to what the Holy Spirit's doing, separate than us. We get to participate. That, talk about what wakes you up in the morning. Yeah. We get to participate in God's plan for us. That wakes me up. I'm alive with that. What can I do to serve God? God, what do you want? Here I am, Lord. Right? It's the offering of ourselves. It's continuing to offer ourselves everything. It's being the slave. It's being the slave of Mary. Right? I want everything. I give it all up for God. And so being willing to be available and use me as you want.
And then it's no longer about me.
Yeah. And I think the key to that is obviously prayer, but I think a big thing I've learned is silence. I'm listening to part of Cardinal Seurat's book on that, which is ironic to listen to it on audiobook when it's about silence. But regardless, he just talks about how it's impossible with all the noise, everything that's going on, which is why I like this format so much. Like, I don't know what time it is. I don't know who's calling me, but like, it's kind of the same concept of like, if you go into mass and you don't have your phone, yeah, you don't know what's going on, but what could you be doing that's more important? Right. Now, I'm not comparing this conversation to mass, but it's kind of on the similar wavelength of if someone really needs me, I would know. And if not, this is a good thing that I'm doing. But being able to tune into that silence and discerning, who am I supposed to talk to? Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to be doing right now? And really taking that to prayer and not just getting bogged down with all of the noise, which is why I've started promoting, I'll do like cigar nights every once in a while. And sometimes a bunch of people show up and it's this big kind of community thing. And sometimes it's just a few of us. And it's kind of nice that it's just quiet. Like, we'll talk, we'll chat. Sure. But there's a kind of an enjoyment of, taking a smoke, relighting your pipe, whatever it is. And there's a leisure that goes about that. And it really gets you to kind of slow down and just unplug. Right. And I think that is extremely healthy. And you see that in the secular culture. People are getting really into, people have been into yoga for a long time, but kind of the meditation and meditation apps and things like that. It's all the same stuff. Right. It's people realizing, we actually function better if we don't get up and check Twitter right away. Like, you need a little bit of time to wake up and pray.
And there's there's a slavery to our phones. I realize. So, for example, we're working at the Primrose. We're working at the mine, from mid-May through Thanksgiving. You only have power when you turn on the generator. Okay. And it's about 6 miles from any other small town. Mm-hmm. So there's no light pollution. So you get incredible stars, incredible quiet up in the high mountains, in high Sierras, incredible. So the quiet and the contemplation is absolutely right. And the slavery of the telephone, where I'm worried about where's my phone and what's going on. So there's a fixation there for me. So I forgot the phone the other day when I went to morning mass, and I realized I was anxious about. What was I anxious about? Right? So letting it go. And I'm preparing for a season of this coming up where I'm not on the phone all the time. I'm not checking constantly, which is very, very good. So we're in the modern era, but there's dangers of the conformity to what others think of us. Yeah. And the peer pressures and we're being slaves to human respect. That's one thing I love about Jesus the Lord and the church fathers. They weren't slaves to human respect. They weren't just pulled in. You know what I'm talking about. Have you heard that phrase before? It's one of the real archetypal modes of the older encyclicals. And the commandment to us, and particularly as men, that we not be slaves to what others think of us. We need to be freed from human respect. Slaves to human respect is a real problem for manhood. I need to do what God wants and not be a slave to your expectations of me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we live in this world of conformity, and we need to free each other to not be slaves. Yeah.
And I think that I'm sure that I think women struggle with this in a unique way that men don't, and I can't pretend to understand what that struggle is. Exactly. But I think for men, it's very much, well, if you went to school for this, why aren't you working in that field or that degree? If you're working in this field, why aren't you trying to become the manager to make more money? If you're, it extrapolates to infinity. There's kind of this constant questioning of other people. Well, you're working a teacher's salary. Why don't you quit that and do sales and you'll make more money? And there's different things that are incentivized. I would say money is probably one of the main ones, but you see that there's kind of an outward judgment of men who are living their lives one way. And really the question should be, why aren't you going to mass more? Or the criticism should be, why aren't you being holier? And then that should be the self-criticism. Why am I not a better person? And not, why am I not making more money? Or why am I not the top sales rep? That's ultimately unimportant.
Well, you're right. And in our culture, in our Catholic culture, we have to build up a culture that supports what does God want. Mm-hmm. And maybe God wants somebody to be an absolute missionary, to go serve the poor, sisters of life. Think of the religious orders. Mm-hmm. Okay, the generosity of the religious. And the prayers of the religious, the cloisters,
Yeah.
where the real power is. We think we're doing something as men. Wait a minute. I've had contact with religious sisters. I worked in a big Port Clare monastery out west as a contractor. Deep contact with these deep, prayer religious sisters. So if our value is just our productivity, we're in slavery. It's not about being productive. What does God want? And some aren't going to make money.
Yeah.
And they're not going to own homes.
Yeah.
Or maybe they deserve to own a home, but they don't. What about providing for the religious?
Yeah, isn't it funny that there's a disconnect that, and I can just be totally honest about this. If one of my friends came up to me and said, "Hey, I've thought about it. I've prayed about it. I want to be a missionary," I'd be like, "You're kind of wasting your life. Like, you should work. You should." But if one of my friends, or male or female, came up to me and said, "I've discerned I want to be in a religious vocation," I'd be like, "Great. What do you need? I'll pay for it." And immediately, if it's you're going to become a monk, you're going to become a priest, you're going to become a nun, okay, that's a high enough calling. And obviously I want to encourage that.
Right.
But there are other ways of serving in a missionary role, in a really low paying job. Hey, I'm going to go be a teacher in the Bronx.
Right.
Why do we not jump to support that kind of in the same sense? It's you're almost doing the exact same service potentially. But why is it when you hear about some guy at St. John's that applied to the seminary, all the old ladies start praying for him, everyone's super excited. But if someone does the exact same thing and says, "Hey, I'm going to be a missionary in this country," everyone's a little bit like, okay, that doesn't seem like a little bit of a waste of time. Why is that the case?
Right.
Is it maybe it's because it's more formalized, more structured? I'm not sure, but I mean, I would definitely react that way, and I shouldn't. I have to take a step back and say, no, I mean, what is this person actually being called to do? And am I called to assist them, or am I just called to pray for them or promote them? But yeah. Well, I remember Dr. Cuddeback one time in class, he said he was talking about how he was thinking. I believe he was saying he was thinking about how the monks at Clear Creek and him, he was like, we live totally different lives. It's totally different. They would never understand what it's like to be a father. They would never understand. But then he said it actually became a source of comfort that if I was up at 3 a.m. with my child crying or something, he would say, "Oh, the monks at Clear Creek are already up praying for us." And he's like, "Oh, okay." That's actually a huge consolation, because it's not, "Oh, look at those religious people who don't understand what family life is like." Actually, they're up before you and they're already praying, and it's for you. They're doing a much more than really you could ever do.
That's right.
In return.
And often, you and I are both married men, and we love the intimacy of marriage and the gifts of family life, right? The goods of family life. But men who are mature enough in themselves to give that up genuinely, I've got tremendous admiration, for men who are men, brothers we know, people we know, that have chosen the priesthood, for example, the celibate priesthood, and are mature enough to not be a danger to anybody, generous with themselves. They're working harder than we'll ever work. And there's no money.
Yeah.
It's not about money.
Yeah.
So we really are stuck in the materialism of our country and our world. And we need to find ourselves, what does the Holy Spirit, what does God want? And then find ways to come alongside and be real friends. Yeah. And continue to build the networks and the friendships and the support mechanism for the cause of Christ. This is not about us. Yeah. It's not about individually or about our little culture. It's about, what is God trying to do with us? And that's a radical proposition. What does the Father want? And he wants more than what we know that he wants more than what we've been given. And so it's big. Glory to God. It's big. And we have and that's a privilege. And we can think about this. And we can then position ourselves to, okay, God, what do you want? And let's do it. And that requires the band of brothers. Yeah. It's not a personal thing.
If you had a devotion or a book that you would recommend to young men who are whatever stage of life they're in, that was just a huge source of consolation or inspiration to you, is there a particular book or a set of prayers or novena or something that has like just kind of been a constant in your life that you refer people to?
Of course, I love Padre Pio, and the novena I prayed is a big deal. But I would say that I'm very drawn to the spirituality of St. Catherine, not Saint, but Catherine de Huick Doherty, Madonna House. She was a prolific writer, Eastern Catholic, who encountered the country, came in the 30s and helped out, with soup kitchens and stuff, Madonna House, Apostolate. She wrote a wonderful book about the parables of the Blue Door. So a tremendous book reflecting on the Madonna houses and the miracles that happen when you consecrate your house to Our Lady. They painted all the doors blue. And she told the stories of people who came in the Blue Door. Tremendous conversion stories. Tremendous stories of the Depression era and her encounter with the poor and how God worked with them. So
I'm looking at that. That's
yeah,
really
it's
cool.
worth looking up.
Yeah, you said she's an Eastern Catholic?
Yeah, it's Catherine DeHoek Doherty, Madonna House. Parallel of Dorothy Day with a similar, but they had farms, and they still have Madonna House up in Ontario. There's a whole farm they work with, and they still have inner city work. So Ben Ferry's sister works at
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Neat. Okay.
yeah. So interconnected with small worlds.
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
You can always do that. That's neat.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there anything you want to give to the people before we leave? Any words of advice or, I don't know, something for people to kind of cling on to?
I don't have anything specific. We've covered some great territory. There's St. Joseph, right?
Yeah.
Being real men, being the real thing, lessening the pretense, becoming more and more real. I mean, Joseph was the silence, right? And not a word in Scripture about Joseph. Didn't say a word, but look what he did. So be the man.
Yeah.
Be the man behind the scenes that just does it. It's not about, it's less and less of ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So we might decrease, he might increase. Yeah.
Totally.
That's the goal of our manhood, really.
Yeah.
And there's great joy there because then we gain heaven. That's the huge. The goal here is beatitude.
That's the game. Yeah.
That's the game.
Yeah.
And and then we can participate in that here. We have a chance they go together.
Yeah.
And we'll never be fully here. See, we have to get there. But I'm certainly hungry for that, and I want to join with others who are hungry for heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Doing Virtue podcast, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening. Thanks.